Ominous wind howls, waves crash against cliffs, and a distant gunshot echoes on the windswept Cornish coast. Where the crumbling end house looms over a restless sea, a young woman laughs in the face of death. Nick Buckley calls them runaway car, a falling boulder, a bullet mistaken for a bee. But Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, sees murder in the shadows. Who wants Nick dead? Is it the charming artist, the secretive cousin, or the friend hiding a deadly truth? As the bodies fall and secrets unravel, Poirot must outwit a cunning killer before Endhouse becomes a tomb. Tense music swells. Will he unmask the truth in time, or will the cliffs claim another victim? Dive into Peril at Endhouse, a chilling tale of deception, betrayal, and the brilliance of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 1. Shadows on the Cornish coast. The Cornish Riviera shimmered under the late August sun, its cliffs jagged against the endless churn of the Atlantic. The majestic hotel, perched like a proud sentinel overlooking the bay, buzzed with the chatter of holidaymakers, wealthy Londoners escaping the city's clamor, retirees seeking the solace of the sea, and the occasional eccentric drawn to the romance of the coast. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the sandy paths, stood on the hotel's terrace, his small fastidious hands clasped behind his back. His mustache, waxed to perfection, twitched as he inhaled the briny air. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, squinted at the horizon, his straw hat tilted at a jaunty angle. "A fine day, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice bright with the optimism of a man on holiday. "Nothing like the seaside to clear the mind. No mysteries here, I'd wager. Just sun, sea, and a spot of cricket on the radio." Poirot's green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, flickered with amusement. "Mon cher Hastings, you underestimate the human heart. Where there are people, there are secrets, and where there are secrets, there is peril. The sea may sparkle, but beneath its surface the currents are treacherous." Hastings chuckled, accustomed to Poirot's penchant for the dramatic. "You see murder in every shadow, old boy. Relax, we're here for a rest, not a case." Poirot did not reply immediately. His gaze drifted to the cliffs below, where a young woman in a bright red sundress darted along a narrow path, her laughter carried by the breeze. She was lithe, with dark curls bouncing as she moved, her carefree gait at odds with the precarious drop to her left. Poirot's brow furrowed. Something about her, perhaps, the reckless abandon of her movements, stirred his instinct. "Come, Hastings," he said abruptly, adjusting his tie. "Let us take a walk. The air is invigorating, and I wish to see more of this charming coast." They descended the stone steps from the hotel, Hastings grumbling about the heat but following nonetheless. The path wound down to a secluded cove, where the young woman had paused to toss pebbles into the waves. As Poirot and Hastings approached, she turned her face alight with a mischievous grin. She was young, perhaps 25, with eyes that danced with a mix of defiance and charm. "Good afternoon," she called, waving as if they were old friends. "You're the famous detective, aren't you, Hercule Poirot? I read about you in the papers. Solved that murder on the Orient Express, didn't you?" Poirot bowed, his mustache quivering with pleasure at the recognition. "Mademoiselle, you have the advantage of me. I am indeed Hercule Poirot, and this is my friend, Captain Hastings." "Nick Buckley," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her skin cool despite the sun. "I live up there, at End House." She gestured toward a sprawling, weathered mansion perched precariously on the cliff above, its windows dark and its walls streaked with salt. "It's a bit of a ruin, but it's home." Hastings, ever gallant, tipped his hat. "Charming place, Miss Buckley. Must have a splendid view." Nick laughed, a sound like breaking glass, sharp yet oddly melodic. "Oh, it's splendid. All right, if you don't mind the wind howling through the cracks or the occasional bat in the attic. Care to join me for a drink at the hotel? I'm parched, and I'd love to hear about your adventures." Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying her. There was something in her tone, a hint of bravado masking something deeper, something anxious. "Mademoiselle, it would be a pleasure. But tell me, do you often walk alone on such dangerous paths?" Nick shrugged, tossing another pebble into the sea. "Oh, I'm used to it. Besides, I've had worse scares." "Why?" "Just last week, my car brakes failed on the hill road, nearly went over the edge. And then there was that boulder that rolled down the cliff, missed me by inches. Oh, and the painting in the hall that fell off the wall, smashed to bits, right where I'd been standing moments before." Hastings gaped, his mustache twitching. "Good Lord, Miss Buckley, that's an extraordinary run of bad luck." Poirot's face remained impassive, but his mind was racing. 3 accidents, each potentially fatal, in such a short span. The little grey cells, as he called them, were already at work. "Mademoiselle," he said carefully, "these incidents, they were accidents, you say?" Nick's smile faltered just for a moment. "Well, what else could they be? I'm not exactly the sort to have enemies. Come on, let's get that drink." They climbed back to the hotel, Nick leading the way with her easy, confident stride. Over cocktails on the terrace, she regaled them with tales of End House, its history as a smuggler's haunt, its crumbling grandeur, and her own struggles to maintain it on a dwindling inheritance. Hastings was charmed, laughing at her witty remarks, but Poirot listened with a different ear. He noted the way her fingers tightened around her glass when she mentioned her cousin Maggie who was visiting, or the fleeting shadow in her eyes when she spoke of her friends, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the terrace. Nick excused herself to fetch her hat, which she left on a nearby chair. Poirot's gaze followed her, and as she lifted the wide-brimmed sun hat, he caught a glint of something at a small, neat hole in the brim, just above the ribbon. He rose swiftly, his cane tapping the floor. "Mademoiselle Buckley," he said, his voice low but urgent, "may I examine your hat?" Nick blinked, surprised, but handed it over. Poirot turned it in his hands, his fingers tracing the hole. It was unmistakable, the clean, precise puncture of a bullet. His heart quickened. This was no accident, no bee buzzing past as Nick had claimed. Someone had fired at her, and they had come perilously close to succeeding. "Hastings," he murmured, "observe, this is not the work of a wasp, but of a far more dangerous creature." Hastings leaned closer, his eyes widening. "Good heavens, Poirot, a bullet hole." "But she said precisement," Poirot interrupted, his voice a velvet blade. "She said it was a bee. Yet this tells a different story. Mademoiselle Buckley is in grave danger, and I, Hercule Poirot, will not permit a murderer to strike under my very nose." Nick returned, her smile bright but brittle. "What's all this about my hat? Found a moth in it." Poirot's eyes met hers, searching for truth behind her carefree facade. "Mademoiselle, I believe someone wishes you harm. These accidents, they are no accidents. You have been marked for death." Nick laughed, but it was a hollow sound, and a hand trembled as she reached for her cocktail. "Oh, come now, Mr. Poirot. You're being dramatic. I'm just clumsy, that's all." But Poirot was not convinced. As the gulls cried overhead and the waves crashed below, he felt the weight of a new case settling upon him. The shadows on the Cornish coast were lengthening, and in their depths lurked a killer. He would protect Nick Buckley, and he would uncover the truth no matter how cleverly it was hidden. The terrace grew quiet, the other guests drifting away as the evening chill set in. Poirot sat back, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Who stood to gain from Nick's death? Who had the opportunity to stage these accidents? And why did Nick herself seem so reluctant to acknowledge the danger? The answers lay ahead, in the dark halls of End House and the secrets of its inhabitants. For now Poirot was content to watch, to listen, and to let his little grey cells begin their work. He sipped his Tizen, the herbal warmth, soothing his nerves. "Hastings," he said softly, "tomorrow we visit End House. I wish to meet these friends of Mademoiselle Buckley. One of them, I think, is not what they seem." Hastings nodded, his earlier joviality replaced by a grim resolve. "Right you are, Poirot. If there's a murderer about, we'll find them." The chapter closed with the two men gazing out at the darkening sea, the lights of End House flickering like a beacon of peril on the cliff above. Poirot's resolve was ironclad. He would unravel this mystery, and the shadows would yield their secrets. Chapter 2. The bullet that wasn't a bee. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace of the majestic hotel, his sharp eyes scanning the Cornish coastline as the morning sun glinted off the waves. The air carried the tang of salt and seaweed, but Poirot's mind was far from the serene beauty before him. Beside him, Captain Hastings adjusted his hat, still buzzing with the excitement of their encounter with Nick Buckley the previous evening. Her casual mention of 3 near-fatal accidents: a car, brake failure, a falling boulder, and a heavy painting nearly crushing her had ignited Poirot's curiosity. The bullet hole in her sun hat, mistaken by Nick for a bee's buzz, had transformed his suspicion into certainty. Someone was trying to kill her. "Poirot, you're brooding again," Hastings said, breaking the silence. He sipped his coffee, the cup clinking against its saucer. "Nick's a charming girl, but surely those accidents could just be bad luck. The bullet, though, that's troubling." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his impatience with Hastings' optimism. "Mon ami, luck does not fire bullets, nor does it arrange for paintings to fall or brakes to fail. No, there is a hand at work here, deliberate and cunning. We must visit End House at once. I wish to see this place where danger lurks so freely." Hastings nodded, though his expression betrayed a flicker of doubt. "You think she's in real danger then, not just exaggerating for attention?" Piotr eyes narrowed. "Nick Buckley is many things: vivacious, reckless, perhaps even secretive, but she does not strike me as a liar. Come, let us go." The walk to End House was a short one, the coastal path winding past cliffs that dropped sharply to the sea. The mansion itself stood at the edge of the town, its once grand facade weathered by time and neglect. Ivy clung to its walls, and several windows were cracked, giving the house an air of melancholy. As they approached, Nick emerged from the front door, her dark hair catching the breeze. She wore a bright red scarf and a smile that seemed to defy the gloom of her surroundings. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," she called, waving them over. "Fancy you coming so soon. I was just about to head into town, but I suppose I can give you the grand tour." Her tone was light, almost flippant, but Poirot noted the way her eyes darted to the shadows of the garden. "Mercy, Mademoiselle Buckley," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "We are here to discuss these incidents. You mentioned the bullet in your hat. It is not a matter to be dismissed lightly." Nick laughed, a sound that echoed off the stone walls. Oh, that. I'm sure it was just some hunter's stray shot. Happens all the time out here. Come inside. You'll see End House isn't exactly a fortress. The interior was as dilapidated as the exterior suggested. The drawing room, where Nick led them, smelled of damp wood and old tobacco. Faded portraits hung crookedly on the walls, and a threadbare rug lay beneath a chipped mahogany table. Nick gestured to a pair of mismatched armchairs, inviting them to sit. As they settled, the door opened, and a young woman entered, her face soft and earnest. "This is Maggie Buckley, my cousin," Nick said, her voice warming. "She's staying with me for the summer. Maggie, meet Mr. Poirot and Captain Hastings." Maggie smiled shyly, her brown eyes wide. "Pleased to meet you both. Nick's been telling me about your detective work, Mr. Poirot. It sounds terribly exciting." Poirot inclined his head. "It is a profession that demands order and method, mademoiselle. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual at End House? Any strangers, perhaps, or odd occurrences?" Maggie hesitated, glancing at Nick. "Well, it's an old house. It creaks and groans, and sometimes I think I hear footsteps at night. But that's just the place settling, isn't it?" Nick rolled her eyes playfully. "Maggie's always imagining ghosts. Honestly, the only thing haunting End House is the bank's letters about my debts." Before Poirot could press further, the door swung open again, admitting a tall, lanky man with paint-stained fingers and a mop of dark hair. "Nick, you didn't tell me we had guests," he said, his voice carrying a hint of reproach. He extended a hand to Poirot. "Jim Lazarus, artist and occasional freeloader. Nick lets me crash here when I'm low on funds." Poirot shook his hand, noting the strength in Lazarus's grip and the intensity in his gaze when he looked at Nick. "An artist, monsieur. You paint the landscapes of this beautiful coast, perhaps?" Lazarus grinned. "Sometimes, mostly portraits, though. Nick's been my muse more than once." He winked at her, and she swatted his arm, laughing. The room grew livelier as another figure appeared, a woman with sleek blonde hair and a guarded expression. "Frederica Rice," Nick introduced, her tone cooling slightly. "Freddie, these are my new friends, Mr. Poirot and Captain Hastings." Frederica's handshake was brief, her fingers cold. "Charmed," she said, though her eyes suggested otherwise. "Nick's always collecting interesting people. I suppose you're here about her little accidents." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "You are aware of these incidents, Madame Rice?" She shrugged, lighting a cigarette with a practiced flick. "Nick's always been a bit accident-prone, but she's tough, aren't you, darling?" Nick's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, Freddie's just jealous because I'm more exciting than she is." The final arrival was Charles Vyse, a bespectacled lawyer with a reserved demeanor. His suit was immaculate, a stark contrast to the house's disrepair. "Miss Buckley's cousin," he said, introducing himself with a nod. "I handle her legal affairs, such as they are." Poirot noted the tension in the room, the way each person seemed to orbit Nick with a mix of affection and unease. He steered the conversation back to the bullet. "Mademoiselle Buckley, may I see this hat of yours? The one with the B." Nick fetched it from a nearby table, a wide-brimmed straw hat with a cheerful yellow ribbon. Poirot examined it closely, his fingers tracing the small, clean hole near the brim. "This is no B, mademoiselle. This is a bullet, fired with intent. You were standing where when it happened?" Nick frowned, thinking. "In the garden, near the cliff edge. I was alone, just enjoying the view. I heard a buzz and felt the hat tug slightly. I thought it was an insect." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "And you saw no one, heard nothing else?" She shook her head. "Nothing, just the wind and the waves." Hastings leaned forward. "Poirot, if someone's shooting at her, they could try again. Shouldn't we call the police?" Poirot waved a hand. "In time, Hastings. First, we must understand the why and the who. Mademoiselle Buckley, you mentioned financial troubles. May I ask, is End House yours outright?" Nick sighed, sinking into a chair. "It's mine, but it's a money pit. The estate's been in the family for generations, but there's no cash to keep it up. I've had to sell off land, and the bank's breathing down my neck." Charles Vyse cleared his throat. "I've advised Nick to sell, but she's stubborn. There's a small inheritance tied to the property, but it's tied up in trusts. Complicated business." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Complicated, indeed. And who would benefit, mademoiselle, if you were no longer here?" Nick laughed, but it was strained. "Nobody, really. Maggie's my closest relative, but there's no fortune to inherit. Just this crumbling pile." Maggie flushed. "Nick, don't say that." "I'd never, of course not, darling," Nick said, patting her hand. "Mr. Poirot's just doing his detective thing." Poirot rose, his movements precise. "I would like to see this garden where the bullet was fired. Perhaps it will tell us more." The group moved outside, the air cooler now, as clouds drifted across the sun. The garden was a tangle of roses and weeds, bordered by a low stone wall that overlooked the cliffs. Poirot paced the area Nick had described, his eyes scanning the ground. He paused near a cluster of bushes, crouching to examine something in the dirt. "Hastings," he called softly, "come here." Hastings hurried over, peering at the spot. A small glinting object lay half buried, a spent bullet casing. Poirot extracted it with a handkerchief, holding it up to the light. A .22 caliber, I believe, not a hunter's weapon. This was personal. Nick's face paled. You mean someone was really trying to? Poirot nodded. Oui, mademoiselle, and they may try again. As the group returned to the house, Poirot lagged behind, his mind racing. The bullet was no accident, and Nick's circle of friends, Lazarus with his intense gaze, Frederica with her cool detachment, Vyse with his calculated reserve, all had secrets. But it was the house itself that troubled him most. Its decay hiding something deeper, something Nick wasn't telling. Back in the drawing room, Poirot's attention was drawn to a small writing desk in the corner. Mademoiselle, may I? He asked, gesturing to it. Nick shrugged. Go ahead. It's mostly junkled letters, bills. Poirot opened the desk, his fingers moving with care. Among the papers he found a folded note, its edges worn. The handwriting was hurried, the ink smudged. Keep quiet or you'll regret it. He held it up, his voice soft but commanding. Mademoiselle Buckley, what is this? Nick's eyes widened, and for the first time, her bravado faltered. I don't know. I've never seen it before. Poirot folded the note carefully, slipping it into his pocket. Then we must find out who does it for your sake, mademoiselle. I hope it is soon. As they left End House, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cliffs. Hastings glanced at Poirot, whose face was unreadable. What now, old chap? Now, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice low. We watch, we listen, and we wait for the killer to make their next move. Chapter 3. Whispers of motive. The morning sun crept over the Cornish cliffs, casting a golden glow across the rugged coastline, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled in Hercule Poirot's mind. The events of the previous evening, the bullet hole in Nick Buckley's sun hat, her casual dismissal of near-fatal accidents, had stirred the little Belgian detective's instincts. Something was amiss at End House, and the more he considered the vivacious Miss Buckley, the more convinced he became that her carefree laughter masked a deeper, darker truth. Beside him, Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, adjusted his tie and glanced toward the seer's face, a mixture of concern and curiosity. Poirot, Hastings began, as they strolled along the path from the majestic hotel toward End House. Do you really believe someone is trying to kill Miss Buckley? I mean, she's charming, full of life. Who could possibly want her dead? Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his amusement at Hastings' earnestness. Mon ami, charm is often a mask, and life, it is a magnet for envy. 3 accidents, brakes failing, a boulder tumbling, a painting falling. None. This is not the work of chance. And that bullet hole, Hastings. It was no bee, as Mademoiselle Nick so quaintly suggested. Someone wishes her harm, and we must discover why before the next accident succeeds. The path wound through gorse and wildflowers, the salty temps of the sea mingling with the scent of earth. End House loomed ahead, its weathered stone facade and ivy-clad walls exuding a faded grandeur. The mansion, perched precariously near the cliff's edge, seemed to teeter between elegance and decay, much like its young mistress. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the grounds, noting the overgrown gardens, the cracked stone steps, and the air of neglect that clung to the place like damp mist. As they approached the front door, it swung open, revealing Nick Buckley herself. She wore a bright yellow dress that seemed to defy the morning's somber mood, her dark hair tumbling in loose waves. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she called, her voice light and teasing. Come to rescue me from my perilous existence. Already, or are you just here for the view? Poirot inclined his head, his expression polite but guarded. Mademoiselle, the view is charming, but it is your safety that concerns me. May we speak inside? There are questions I must ask. Nick's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly, ushering them into the drawing room. The interior of End House was as eclectic as its owner, mismatched furniture, faded tapestries, and a clutter of modern trinkets juxtaposed against antique relics. A large window overlooked the cliffs, framing the restless sea beyond. Nick flopped onto a sagging sofa, gesturing for them to sit. Now, Monsieur Poirot, she said, crossing her legs, what's all this fuss about? I told you, those accidents were just bad luck. I'm not the sort to make enemies, you know. Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying her with the intensity of a jeweler examining a flawed gem. Bad luck, mademoiselle, does not fire bullets. Tell me who are the people closest to you. Your friends, your family, those who frequent this house. Nick shrugged, her fingers toying with a silver bracelet. Oh, the usual crowd. There's Maggie, my cousin, she's staying here for the summer. Sweet girl, a bit dull, but terribly loyal. Then there's Jim Lazarus, the artist. He's mad about painting and, well, mad about me, I suppose. She laughed, but Poirot noted a flicker of unease in her eyes. Frederica Rice-Reddish, she's my dearest friend, though she's been a bit off lately. And Charles Vyse, my cousin and lawyer. He handles all the boring legal stuff for End House. That's about it, really. Hastings leaned forward, his notebook open. And what about this aviator fellow you mentioned last night? Michael Seaton, wasn't it? Nick's expression softened, a wistful smile crossing her lips. Michael, yes. We were engaged, you know, before he vanished on one of his flying adventures. He's off trying to break some record or other, circling the globe. Haven't heard from him in months." Her voice caught, but she quickly masked it with a shrug. "That's life, isn't it? Full of comings and goings." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And this Michael Seaton, he is a man of means. His fortune, it would be significant." Nick hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. "I suppose so. He's from a wealthy family, and he's got a knack for making money." "Why do you ask?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he rose and paced the room, his polished shoes clicking against the worn floorboards. "Mademoiselle, your home. This end house it is in need of repair, Nan. The roof leaks, the walls crumble. Such things require funds, and yet you live with a certain extravagance. Tell me, how do you manage?" Nick's laughter was sharp, almost brittle. "Oh, I get by. A bit of charm, a bit of credit, and a lot of hoping for the best. End house has been in the family for ages. I couldn't bear to lose it." Poirot paused by a side table, his gaze settling on a photograph of Nick and a handsome young man in aviator goggles. "Michael Seaton, presumably. And if something were to happen to you, mademoiselle, to whom would end house pass?" Nick frowned, her fingers tightening on her bracelet. "I haven't really thought about it. Charles, I suppose, as my closest relative. Or perhaps Maggie. There's a will somewhere, but it's all rather vague." Poirot's mustache twitched again, and Hastings knew that look. It was the look of a man who had found a thread to pull. "Vague, mademoiselle. In matters of life and death, vagueness is dangerous. I should like to see this will, if you please." Before Nick could respond, the door opened, and Maggie Buckley entered, her plain cotton dress a stark contrast to Nick's vibrant attire. Maggie was a quiet, unassuming young woman, her soft brown hair pulled back in a simple bun. "Nick, are you all right?" she asked, her eyes flicking nervously to Poirot and Hastings. "I heard voices and thought, I'm fine, Maggie," Nick said, her tone a touch impatient. "Monsieur Poirot is just playing detective. He thinks someone's out to get me." Maggie's eyes widened. "Out to get you? Oh, Nick, that's absurd. Who would want to hurt you?" Poirot turned to Maggie, his voice gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle Maggie, you are close to your cousin." "We are close." "Her habits. Have you noticed anything unusual? Any visitors, perhaps, who seemed out of place?" Maggie hesitated, her hands twisting together. "I don't know. Nick's always so popular. There's always someone dropping by, Jim, Freddie even. That odd couple, the Crofts, from the lodge. But nothing strange, really." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. "Merci, mademoiselle. And you? You have no enemies of your own? No one who might wish harm to those close to Mademoiselle Nick?" Maggie shook her head vigorously. "Oh no, I'm nobody important. I just keep Nick company." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jim Lazarus, his paint-splattered smock suggesting he'd come straight from his easel. He was a tall, lanky man with intense blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. "Nick, you didn't tell me. We had guests," he said, his tone half teasing, half possessive. He nodded to Poirot and Hastings. "Gentlemen, welcome to the chaos of End House." Poirot observed Jim closely, noting the way his gaze lingered on Nick. "Monsieur Lazarus, you are an artist. We are an artist. And a friend of Mademoiselle Nick. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in her recent behavior? Any fears she may have expressed?" Jim's smile faded slightly. "Nick's always been a bit reckless, but no, nothing specific. She's who had those accidents, of course, but she laughs them off. You know, Nick never takes anything too seriously." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, monsieur, someone takes her life very seriously indeed. A bullet is not a laughing matter." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them like a fog. Nick shifted uncomfortably, her fingers still playing with her bracelet. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, you're making a mountain out of a molehill." "I'm fine, truly." But Poirot was not convinced. As they left End House to return to the majestic hotel, he confided in Hastings. "Mon ami, there is a shadow over this place, a shadow of greed or envy or perhaps something darker. Mademoiselle Nick, she knows more than she says, and her friends, they watch her with eyes that do not trust." That evening, Nick insisted on hosting a dinner at End House, claiming it would lift everyone's spirits. Poirot and Hastings arrived, to find the drawing room transformed with candles and flowers. Though the underlying shabbiness of the mansion was impossible to hide, the guests included Maggie, Jim Lazarus, Frederica Rice, and Charles Vyse, each bringing their own tension to the table. Frederica, or Freddie as Nick called her, was a striking woman with pale blonde hair and a distant, almost haunted expression. Her silk dress clung to a slender frame, and her movements were slow, almost languid, as if she carried an invisible weight. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and husky, "Nick tells me you're playing detective. Found any clues?" Yet Poirot smiled politely. "Madame Rice, the clues, they are like stars visible only when the night is darkest. But I am beginning to see." Charles Vyse, the lawyer, sat stiffly at the table, his thin lips pressed into a line. He was a man of precision, his suit immaculate, his manner reserved. "I hope you're not filling Nick's head with nonsense," he said, his tone clipped. "She's prone to dramatics as it is." Nick laughed, raising her glass. "Oh, Charles, you're such a bore. Let Monsieur Poirot have his fun. It's like living in one of those mystery novels Maggie loves." Maggie blushed, her eyes fixed on her plate. "I don't read that many," she mumbled, but Poirot noted her discomfort. There was something unspoken here, something that bound these people together in a web of secrets. As the meal progressed, the conversation grew strained. Jim Lazarus spoke passionately about his latest painting, a stormy seascape inspired by the Cornish cliffs. But his eyes kept drifting to Nick. Frederica barely touched her food, her gaze fixed on some distant point. Charles Vyse answered questions with curt precision, revealing little. Poirot, ever observant, noted the subtle glances, the unspoken tensions, the way Nick seemed to orchestrate the evening with a deft hand after dinner as the guests moved to the terrace for coffee. Poirot slipped away to explore the house. He found himself in Nick's bedroom, a cluttered space filled with books, clothes, and half-finished sketches. On her dressing table, he spotted a small box of chocolates, tied with a ribbon. His curiosity piqued. He opened it, only to find a note tucked inside. "Eat one, darling, and dream of me." The handwriting was elegant, almost too perfect, and there was no signature. Poirot's instincts screamed danger. He carefully extracted one chocolate and sniffed it, detecting a faint, bitter odor beneath the sweetness. Poison, he was certain. He wrapped the chocolate in a handkerchief and pocketed it, intending to have it analyzed. As he turned to leave, he heard a soft creak from the hallway. Someone was watching. Slipping out, he found no one, but the air felt heavy with unseen eyes. He rejoined the others on the terrace, where Nick was laughing at one of Jim's stories, her voice bright but brittle. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The accidents, the bullet, the poisoned chocolate. Someone was playing a deadly game, and Nick was at its center. As the evening drew to a close, Poirot pulled Hastings aside. "Mon ami, we must be vigilant. The killer is close, perhaps among those we dined with tonight. The motive, it whispers to us, money, love, revenge. But which, and why does Mademoiselle Nick seem so unafraid?" Hastings frowned. "You think she's hiding something, don't you?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "Always, Hastings. Always." The night ended with a sense of unease, the sea's restless waves echoing the turmoil in Poirot's mind. As they walked back to the majestic hotel, the stars above seemed to mock their efforts, twinkling with secrets yet to be unveiled. The game was afoot, and Poirot knew the next move could be deadly. Chapter 4. The Ghost of End House. The Cornish coast stretched out beneath a sky heavy with clouds, the kind that seemed to press down on the world, muffling sound and casting the cliffs in a somber, grayish hue. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit slightly out of place among the rugged landscape, walked alongside Captain Hastings, whose tweed jacket blended more naturally with the air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the distant crash of waves against the rocks provided a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. End House loomed ahead, its weathered facade half hidden by overgrown ivy, its windows like eyes that had seen too much. Poirot's sharp gaze darted from the uneven path to the mansion, his mind already turning over the peculiarities of Nick Buckley's so-called accidents. "It is not natural," Hastings, Poirot said, his voice crisp despite the damp air. "3 near-fatal incidents: a car, a boulder, a painting, and now a bullet that Mademoiselle Nick dismisses as a bee. Nan, mon ami, this is no coincidence. There is a hand at work here, a mind that calculates and waits." Hastings, the loyal but slightly bewildered companion, adjusted his hat against the breeze. "But who would want to harm her, Poirot? She's such a lively girl, full of charm." "Perhaps it's just bad luck." Poirot stopped abruptly, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. He turned to Hastings, his mustache twitching with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "Bad luck? Mon cher, luck does not fire bullets. Luck does not arrange for heavy objects to fall with such precision. No, we are dealing with intent, and I intend to uncover it." Their destination was the garden of End House, where Nick had. We invited them to join her for tea. The invitation had been casual, almost flippant, but Poirot sensed an opportunity to observe her circle of friends more closely. The path wound through a tangle of wild roses and gorse, the thorns catching at Hastings' trousers as he muttered about the state of the grounds. "This place is falling apart," he said, eyeing a crumbling stone wall. "No wonder Nick's in financial trouble. Maintaining an estate like this must be a nightmare." "Precisement," Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "And yet, it is not the house itself that interests me, but the secrets it holds. End House is a stage, Hastings, and we must watch the players carefully." They reached the garden, where a wrought iron table was set beneath a sagging pergola. Nick Buckley was already there, lounging in a wicker chair, her bright scarf fluttering like a flag of defiance against the gloomy day. She waved them over with a grin, her dark eyes sparkling with mischief. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, you're just in time for Mrs. Croft's famous scones." She's been fussing over them all morning. Beside her sat Maggie Buckley, her cousin, whose quiet demeanor contrasted sharply with Nick's exuberance. Maggie's hands were folded neatly in her lap, her plain dress and soft brown hair giving her an air of understated grace. Jim Lazarus, the artist with a penchant for bold colors and bolder flirtations, leaned against a nearby pillar, sketching idly on a pad. Frederica Rice, whom Nick had introduced as her best friend in the world, sat with a cigarette dangling from her fingers, her pale face unreadable. Charles Vyse, the lawyer and Nick's distant cousin, stood apart, his angular frame stiff as he surveyed the group with a faint frown. Poirot took a seat, his movements deliberate, as if positioning himself to observe every nuance of the gathering. Hastings followed, accepting a cup of tea from Mrs. Croft, a robust Australian woman who bustled about with an almost theatrical warmth. Her husband, Bert Croft, hovered nearby, his weathered face creased with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The tea was poured, scones were passed, and the conversation began to flow. Though Poirot noted the undercurrents of tension beneath the polite chatter. Nick, ever the hostess, regaled them with a story of a local fisherman who swore he'd seen a ghost on the cliffs near End House. He says it's a woman in white, drifting along the edge at midnight, she said, her voice teasing. Utter nonsense, of course, but it does add a bit of thrill to the place, don't you think? Maggie shivered slightly. I don't like it, Nick. All these stories, they make this place feel so eerie. Oh, Maggie, don't be such a goose, Nick laughed. But Poirot caught the fleeting glance she shot toward Frederica, who exhaled a plume of smoke and said nothing. Jim Lazarus looked up from his sketch. Ghosts or not, this place has character. I'd love to paint it at dusk, with the shadows creeping over the cliffs. There's something alive about it. Alive, or deadly, Frederica murmured, her voice low but carrying a weight that made Hastings glance at her sharply. Poirot sipped his tea, his eyes flicking from one face to another. Mademoiselle Nick, he said, setting his cup down with a soft clink, you spoke of accidents. But I am curious, have there been other incidents here at End House? Perhaps stories from the past, or events that might explain these tales of ghosts? Nick shrugged, her smile unwavering. Oh, you know how old houses are. Creaky floors, strange noises. The locals love to spin yarns about smugglers and shipwrecks, but it's all just atmosphere. Atmosphere, Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. And yet, atmosphere can conceal much, can it not? A bullet, for instance, mistaken for A.B. The group fell silent, the only sound a distant cry of a gull. Nick's smile faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. You're awfully dramatic, Monsieur Poirot. It was just a silly moment. I'm fine, aren't I, for now, Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm. But I would advise caution, mademoiselle. The sea is not the only thing that hides dangers here. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, cataloguing every gesture, every word. He noticed the way Charles Vyse's fingers tightened around his teacup when Nick mentioned her financial troubles. He saw the brief, almost imperceptible glance between Jim and Frederica, as if they shared a secret, and he noted Mrs. Croft's overly attentive manner, her eagerness to refill cups and offer scones, as if to distract from something unspoken. As the afternoon waned, Nick proposed a walk along the cliffs to watch the sunset. It's the best view in Cornwall, she said, her enthusiasm infectious. The group agreed, though Charles declined, citing paperwork to attend to. Poirot, sensing an opportunity to explore the grounds further, joined the others, with Hastings at his side. The cliff path was narrow, winding along the edge where the land dropped sharply to the rocks below. The wind picked up, tugging at Poirot's coat, and he kept a careful distance from the edge. Nick led the way, her scarf a bright splash of color against the gray stone. Maggie walked beside her, while Jim and Frederica trailed behind, their conversation hushed. The Crofts followed, Mrs. Croft chattering about the beauty of the Cornish coast. Though Poirot noted her husband's silence, they paused at a lookout point where the sea stretched out like a vast, restless creature. Nick pointed to a jagged rock formation below. That's where the boulder fell, she said, her tone light. Nearly squashed me flat. Lucky I'm quick on my feet. Poirot crouched to examine the ground, his fingers brushing over the grass. And where exactly were you standing, mademoiselle? Oh, just there, Nick said, pointing vaguely. It all happened so fast. Fast indeed, Poirot murmured, his eyes scanning the cliff edge. He noticed a faint scuff mark in the dirt, as if something heavy had been dragged. And no one else was nearby. Not a soul, Nick said, but Poirot caught the slight hesitation in her voice as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cliffs in a fiery glow. The group made their way back toward End House. The mood was lighter, the earlier tension seemingly forgotten, but Poirot's mind was racing. The accidents, the bullet, the cryptic note in Nick's room, they formed a pattern, but one that was not yet clear. He needed more time, more observation. That evening, Nick announced a surprise. A local firework display was scheduled on the beach below End House, a tradition to mark the end of summer. We'll have the best view from the terrace, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "You must stay, Monsieur Poirot. It's quite a show." Poirot agreed, sensing another opportunity to watch the dynamics of the group. The terrace was set with lanterns, and a small crowd gathered, locals, guests from the majestic hotel, and Nick's circle. The air was filled with laughter and the clink of glasses, but Poirot remained alert, his eyes never straying far from Nick. As the first fireworks exploded in the sky, painting the night with bursts of red and gold, a sharp crack cut through the noise. For a moment Poirot thought it was part of the display, but then he saw Nick stumble, her hand clutching her arm. Hastings rushed to her side, his face pale. "Good Lord, Poirot, she's been shot." The crowd erupted in chaos, people shouting and running for cover. Poirot, his heart pounding but his mind clear, knelt beside Nick. A thin trickle of blood seeped through her sleeve, but the wound was shallow, a graze rather than a direct hit. "Courage, mademoiselle," he said, his voice steady. "You are not badly hurt." Nick's face was pale, but she managed a weak smile. "Another bee, Monsieur Poirot, Nan," he said grimly. This was no bee. Chief Inspector Japp arrived within the hour. His familiar bulldog-like presence, a comfort to Hastings but a challenge to Poirot, who preferred to work without official interference. Japp surveyed the scene, his notebook already in hand. "Right, then," he said, "another accident. Or something more sinister." "Sinister, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes scanning the terrace. This was no accident. The fireworks provided the perfect cover of distraction planned with care. Japp raised an eyebrow. "You're saying someone took a shot at her in the middle of all this?" "Precise," and Poirot said, "and I intend to find out who." As Japp questioned the guests, Poirot moved among them, his ears attuned to every word, his eyes catching every glance. He noted that Jim Lazarus had been standing near the terrace railing, his sketchpad abandoned. Frederica had been smoking, her cigarette stubs littering the ground. The Crofts had been mingling with the locals, their voices loud and cheerful. Charles Vyse, who had rejoined the group for the fireworks, stood apart, his face unreadable. Attention was drawn to a small pile of cigarette butts near the railing, one still smoldering. He picked it up carefully, noting the brand French, not the kind Frederica smoked. "Interesting," he murmured, slipping it into his pocket. By midnight, the terrace had cleared, and Nick was resting inside, her arm bandaged. Japp, satisfied that no immediate arrests could be made, promised to return in the morning. Poirot, however, lingered on the terrace, his eyes fixed on the spot where Nick had been standing. The fireworks had been a distraction, yes, but a clever one. The shooter had known the noise would mask the shot, the crowd would obscure their movements. This was no impulsive act but a calculated attempt. "Hastings," Poirot said, turning to his friend, who was hovering anxiously nearby, "we must make a list. Everyone who was here tonight, their positions, their alibis, and we must consider their motives. Who stands to gain from Mademoiselle Nick's death?" Hastings nodded, pulling out his notebook. "Right, there's Maggie, of course. Her cousin, she's the closest to Nick, but she seems harmless. Jim Lazarus, he's sweet on Nick, isn't he? Could be jealousy, though I can't see him as a killer. Frederica Rice, there's something off about her, don't you think? Always so quiet, watching everyone. And Charles Vyse, he's got that cold, loyally look. Maybe he's after the estate and the Crofts," Poirot added. "Do not forget them. They are too eager to involved. And there is the matter of the missing aviator, Michael Seaton. His fortune, if it exists, could change everything." They sat late into the night, compiling their list, cross-referencing alibis with the positions of the guests during the fireworks. Poirot's mind worked like a machine, sorting through the details, discarding what was irrelevant, focusing on what mattered. The cigarette butt, the scuff mark on the cliff, the note in Nick's room, they were pieces of a puzzle, and he was determined to fit them together as dawn broke over the Cornish coast, casting a pale light over End House. Poirot stood alone, on the terrace, his hands clasped behind his back. The sea was calm now, its surface like glass. But beneath that calm, he knew currents ran deep and dangerous. The shot during the fireworks had been no accident, no random act. Someone had planned it, someone who knew Nick's habits, her movements, her vulnerabilities. "The web is tightening," mon ami, Poirot murmured to himself, though Hastings was asleep in a chair nearby. "But the spider is clever, and I must be cleverer still." He turned back toward the house, his steps purposeful. The ghost of End House, if it existed, was not supernatural but human with a motive, a plan, and a willingness to kill. And Hercule Poirot, with his little gray cells, would unmask them before they could strike again. Chapter 5. A cousin's sacrifice. The moon hung low over the Cornish cliffs, casting a silvery sheen across the rugged landscape that cradled End House. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the distant murmur of waves crashing against the rocks below. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace, his small fastidious frame wrapped in a light overcoat despite the mild summer night. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the shadowed grounds of the estate, where the silhouettes of gnarled trees twisted like specters in the moonlight. Beside him, Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, shifted uncomfortably, his brow furrowed with unease. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, There's something about this place that gives me the creeps. It's as if the house itself is watching us. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. Mon ami, you allow your imagination to run wild. End house is but stone and mortar, yet it holds secrets. Yes, secrets that we must unravel. The little grey cells, they are at work. The evening had begun with an air of festivity, or at least as much festivity as the dilapidated end house could muster. Nick Buckley, the vivacious young owner of the estate, had organized a small gathering, insisting it was merely to lift the spirits of her eclectic circle of friends. The guest list was a curious mix. Maggie Buckley, Nick's gentle and unassuming cousin; Jim Lazarus, the brooding artist with a penchant for dramatic gestures; Frederica Rice, the enigmatic widow whose cool exterior belied a turbulent past; and Charles Weiss, the reserved lawyer whose stiff demeanor seemed to conceal more than it revealed. The gathering was meant to be a casual affair, with wine, music, and the promise of a moonlit view over the cliffs. Yet Poirot's instincts told him that danger lurked beneath the surface of this seemingly innocuous event. The terrace was adorned with lanterns, their soft glow flickering against the weathered stone walls of End House. Nick, dressed in a vibrant red shawl that seemed to defy the somber atmosphere, flitted among her guests, her laughter ringing out like a bell. Maggie, ever the contrast to her cousin, wore a simple white dress, her quiet presence almost lost in Nick's exuberance. Poirot watched them both closely, his mind cataloguing every glance, every gesture. The bullet hole in Nick's sun hat, discovered only days ago, was a stark reminder that someone in this circle or perhaps beyond it harbored murderous intent. As the evening progressed, the group moved to the lawn where a small table had been set up with drinks and a gramophone, playing a jaunty tune. The moon was at its zenith now, bathing the scene in an ethereal light. Poirot, however, remained alert, his eyes darting to the shadows beyond the lantern's reach. He had positioned himself near the edge of the group, where he could observe, without being drawn into the revelry. Hastings, less restrained, had joined the others, his laughter mingling with Nick's as they danced to the music. It was then that the air was pierced by a sharp cracker sound that cut through the music, like a blade. The gramophone faltered, and for a moment, silence reigned. Poirot's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. The guests froze, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. Nick, standing near the cliff's edge, clutched her shawl, her expression one of startled amusement. "Good heavens!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying a forced lightness. Was that a firecracker? Poirot was already moving, his small frame surprisingly agile as he crossed the lawn. "Mademoiselle, stay where you are," he commanded, his tone sharp. He reached Nick's side and gently but firmly pulled her away from the cliff's edge. His eye scanned her red shawl, then the ground nearby. There, embedded in the soft earth, was a small, glinting object, a bullet. Hastings, who had rushed to Poirot's side, gasped. "Good Lord, Poirot, that was no firecracker," Nan Poirot said grimly, kneeling to examine the bullet. "This was meant for Mademoiselle Buckley. But why, I wonder, does the killer strike now, in such a public manner?" The guests gathered around, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern and denial. Maggie, pale and trembling, clutched Nick's arm. "Nick, you could have been killed," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jim Lazarus, his dark eyes flashing, stepped forward. "This is madness. Who would want to harm Nick?" Frederica Rice, standing slightly apart, lit a cigarette with a steady hand, though her face was unreadable. "Perhaps it was an accident," she said coolly. "A hunter in the woods, maybe." Charles Weiss, ever the stoic, adjusted his glasses and said nothing, though his gaze lingered on Nick with an intensity that did not escape Poirot's notice. Poirot rose, brushing the dirt from his knees with a handkerchief. "An accident? Non, madame, this was no stray shot. The bullet was aimed with precision. We are fortunate that the aim was poorer, perhaps. Not so poor." The police was summoned, and within the hour, Chief Inspector Japp arrived, his familiar brusqueness tempered by the gravity of the situation. His men cordoned off the area, and the guests were ushered into the drawing room of End House, where the atmosphere was thick with tension. Japp, a man of action rather than subtlety, took charge with his usual efficiency, his notebook open and his pencil poised. "Now then," Japp said, his eyes sweeping the room, "let's have it. Who saw what?" The accounts were pretty varied. Nick claimed she had felt a rush of air near her cheek, which she had initially mistaken for a gust of wind. Maggie, who had been standing closest to her cousin, insisted she had seen nothing but the flash of the lanterns reflecting off the cliffs. Jim Lazarus, with a flair for the dramatic, described a shadowy figure lurking near the trees, though he admitted he couldn't be sure. Frederica Rice maintained she had been facing the sea, her back to the lawn, and had seen nothing at all. Charles Weiss, true to form, offered a precise but unhelpful account of the exact time the shot was fired, claiming he had checked his watch, out of habit. Poirot, standing near the fireplace, listened with his head tilted slightly, his hands clasped behind his back. He said little, allowing Japp to conduct the initial interviews, but his eyes missed nothing. When Japp turned to him, he raised a hand. "Chief Inspector, if I may," Poirot said, his voice calm but authoritative. "There is a detail that troubles me. The shawl you see, the red shawl that Mademoiselle Buckley wore tonight. It is distinctive, Nan. A beacon in the moonlight." Jap frowned. "What's your point, Poirot?" "My point, mon ami, is that the shawl may have been the target, not Mademoiselle Buckley herself, but the shawl." The room fell silent. Nick, perched on the edge of a sofa, laughed nervously. "Oh, Poirot, really? Why would anyone shoot at my shawl?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, because someone else was wearing it." A gasp escaped Maggie, and all eyes turned to her. She shook her head, her hands trembling. "No, I didn't. I mean, I wasn't." But before she could finish, a scream tore through the room. It came from the terrace where one of Jap's constables had been stationed. The group rushed outside, Poirot leading the way with surprising speed. There, lying on the grass near the cliff's edge, was Maggie Buckley, her white dress stained with a spreading crimson blot. The red shawl lay crumpled beside her, as if discarded in haste. She was still, her eyes staring blankly at the starry sky. Jap knelt beside her, his face grim as he checked for a pulse. "She's gone," he said quietly. Shot through the heart. Nick collapsed into Jim's arms, sobbing, "Maggie, oh God." Maggie. Poirot's face was a mask of controlled fury. He knelt beside the body, his fingers brushing the edge of the shawl. "The killer has made a mistake," he murmured. "A fatal mistake." The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Jap's men scoured the grounds, searching for the murder weapon. But the cliffs and surrounding woods offered countless hiding places. The guests were questioned again, their alibis dissected with ruthless precision. Poirot, however, retreated into his own thoughts, pacing the drawing room as Jap coordinated the investigation. Hastings, shaken by the tragedy, approached his friend. "Poirot, how could this happen? Maggie was soupness. Surely she wasn't the target." Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. "Innocent, yes, but not the target. I think the shawl, Hastings, the shawl was the key. The killer saw the red shawl in the moonlight and fired, believing it was Mademoiselle Nick. Maggie, poor child, was wearing it when she stepped onto the terrace. A tragic error, but one that reveals much." "But who would want Nick dead?" Hastings asked, his voice hoarse. "And why? That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The motive lies hidden in the relationships of this house and the secrets that each guest carries. We must examine their alibis, their movements, their lies, the little gray cells. They will find the truth." The rest of the night was spent in meticulous investigation. Poirot insisted on reconstructing the timeline of the evening, noting where each guest had been when the shot was fired. Jim Lazarus claimed he had been near the gramophone, adjusting the record. Frederica Rice said she had stepped inside to fetch a shawl of her own, as the night had grown chilly. Charles Weiss predictably had been in the library, reviewing some legal documents for Nick. Nick herself had been dancing with Hastings, though she admitted to stepping away briefly to speak with Maggie. Poirot's questions were relentless, probing for inconsistencies. He asked Jim about the exact record he had chosen, catching a hesitation in his response. He pressed Frederica on the timing of her trip indoors, noting that no one had seen her re-enter the drawing room. Charles Weiss's account was almost too perfect, his precise recollection of the time raising Poirot's suspicions, and Nick's tears seemed genuine. But Poirot could not shake the feeling that her grief was tinged with something else, relief perhaps, or fear. As dawn broke over the Cornish coast, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Poirot stood alone on the terrace, the red shawl now in an evidence bag held by one of Jap's men. He stared out at the sea, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The bullet, the shawl, the moonlit gathering, all were pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. "Hastings," he said as his friend joined him, "the killer is clever, but not clever enough. They have left a trail, however faint. The shawl was meant to deceive, but it has betrayed them instead. We will find the truth. Mon ami and Maggie Buckley will not have died in vain." The chapter closed with Poirot's resolve hardened, his mind already piecing together the fatal flaw in the killer's plan. The guests of End House, unaware of the net tightening around them, retired to their rooms, their secrets buried deep, not deep enough to escape the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 6. The cocaine clue. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of End House, casting long, wavering shadows across the worn parquet floor. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes sharp and unyielding as he surveyed the scene. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and salt from the nearby sea, but something else lingered, an undercurrent of unease, a whisper of secrets hidden in the crevices of the dilapidated mansion. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, stood by the window, his brow furrowed as he gazed out at the cliffs that loomed over the Cornish coast. "Poirot," Hastings began, turning from the window, "this business with the shawl and Maggie's death, it's monstrous. Do you really think the killer meant to hit Nick and got Maggie by mistake?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his mind at work. "Mon ami, the mistake. It is not so simple. The shawl, it was distinctive, but it was worn by Maggie at the precise moment the shot was fired. The killer, they are clever, but not infallible. There is a pattern, Hastings, and we shall unravel it. Before Hastings could respond, the door creaked open, and Nick Buckley swept into the room. Her auburn hair was tousled, her eyes bright with a mix of defiance and exhaustion. She wore a silk dressing gown that hung loosely on her slender frame, and her smile, though charming, seemed to mask a deeper tension. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice light but edged with something Poirot couldn't quite place. "I hope you slept well, despite all this drama." Poirot inclined his head, his gaze never leaving her. "Mademoiselle Nick, the drama, as you call it, is most serious. The death of your cousin Maggie is no mere accident. We must speak plainly now. There are dark matters that require explanation." Nick's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, sinking into an armchair with a theatrical sigh. "Oh, Poirot, you do make everything sound so ominous. I've told you everything, my silly accidents, the bullet that wasn't a bee. What more is there?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "There is much, mademoiselle, for instance." He reached into his pocket and produced a small object, holding it up to the light. It was a delicate wristwatch, its face cracked, its band worn. But what caught the attention of both Hastings and Nick was the faint residue of a white powder clinging to its edges. Nick's expression shifted, a flicker of alarm crossing her face before she masked it with a laugh. "My old watch. I haven't worn that in ages. Where did you find it?" "In your room, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone measured, hidden in a drawer, behind a pile of scarves. "And this powder, it is not talcum, Nan. It is cocaine." Hastings gasped, his eyes wide. "Cocaine? Good heavens, Poirot. Are you sure?" Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. "I am always sure, Hastings. The substance, it has been tested. A small sample, sent to a chemist friend of mine in London, confirmed it. This watch, mademoiselle, it is not merely a timepiece, it is a clue." Nick's laughter died, and she leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You're mistaken, Poirot. I don't know anything about drugs. That watch, it must belong to someone else. Perhaps a guest left it here." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "A guest, you say, yet it was in your room, in a place most secret. And the cocaine, it is not the only secret in End House, is it?" The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like dust. Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his sense of propriety warring with his curiosity. Nick's eyes darted to the window, as if seeking escape, but she remained seated, her fingers twisting the hem of her gown. "Very well," she said at last, her voice quieter now. "I'll admit I've been under strain. End House is falling apart, my debts are mounting, and while I've had my share of troubles, but cocaine, that's absurd. I'm not that sort of girl." Poirot tilted his head, studying her as one might study a rare insect, perhaps, mademoiselle. "But the truth, it has a way of revealing itself. Tell me, do you know a man named George?" Nick's face paled, and for a moment Hastings thought she might faint. "George," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know any George." But Poirot was not convinced. He stepped closer, his voice low and deliberate. "Mademoiselle, I advise you to be truthful. George is known in certain circles that deal in substances like the one in your watch. He is a dealer, and not a man to be trifled with. If you are entangled with him, it is better to tell me now." Nick stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "This is ridiculous. I don't know any George, and I don't know anything about cocaine. You're trying to pin something on me, Poirot, but I won't have it. I'm the victim. Here someone's trying to kill me." Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm but firm. "Calm yourself, mademoiselle. I do not accuse you yet, but the facts, they are stubborn. The watch, the cocaine, the secrets of End House, they point to a truth you cannot ignore. I will find it, with or without your help." Nick stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Hastings turned to Poirot, his face a mixture of shock and indignation. "Poirot, surely you don't think Nick is involved in some drug ring? She's a young woman in distress, not a criminal mastermind." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of determination. "Hastings, you see the surface, but I see the depths. The cocaine, it is a thread in a larger tapestry. We must follow it, and quickly, before another tragedy strikes." The rest of the morning was spent in a flurry of investigation. Poirot, with Hastings trailing behind, combed through End House, searching for further clues. The mansion, with its creaking floors and faded wallpaper, seemed to hold its secrets tightly, but Poirot was relentless. In a dusty attic, they found a hidden compartment behind a loose panel, containing a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured as he untied the ribbon and scanned the first letter. "These are from Michael Seaton, the aviator. Love letters, Hastings, but also something more. Listen to this. My dearest Nick, the will is settled, but you must be careful. There are those who would stop at nothing to claim what is yours." Hastings frowned. Michael Seaton, the missing aviator Nick was engaged to. "What does it mean, Poirot?" "It means, mon ami, that there is a motive buried in the past. The will, perhaps it is the key to End House, to Nick's debts, to everything. But the cocaine, it complicates matters. Is it a distraction, or is it the heart of the mystery?" They returned to the drawing room, where Poirot spread the letters on a table, his fingers moving deftly as he read each one. The letters spoke of love, of adventure, but also of a family's secret dispute over End House's ownership that had torn Nick's family apart years ago. One letter hinted at a hidden inheritance, a legacy that could save Nick from her financial ruin, but only if she survived to claim it. As Poirot read, Hastings paced the room, his mind racing. This is all very well, Poirot, but what about the cocaine? You can't seriously think Nick is dealing drugs. She's reckless, yes, but a criminal. Poirot set down the final letter, his expression unreadable. The cocaine, Hastings. It is not just about Nick, it is a clue to a larger game. Someone in this house, perhaps more than one, is entangled in a web of deceit. The watch, the letters, the attempts on Nick's life, they are connected. We must find George, and we must learn what he knows. The day wore on, and Poirot's investigation took them beyond End House. They ventured into the nearby village of St. Lou, where whispers of a shady figure named George circulated among the locals. A barmaid at the local pub, her eyes wary, confirmed that George was a known figure, a man who dealt in powders and promises. As she put it, he was last seen near the cliffs, meeting with someone in a hooded cloak, a description that matched no one in Nick's circle, yet deepened Poirot's suspicions. Back at End House, Poirot confronted Frederica Rice, the enigmatic friend who had been notably quiet since Maggie's death. Frederica, with her pale blonde hair and distant eyes, sat in the garden, a cigarette dangling from her fingers. She seemed detached, almost ethereal. But Poirot sensed a storm beneath her calm exterior. Madame Rice, Poirot began, his tone polite but probing. You have been most silent about the events at End House, yet I suspect you know more than you say. The cocaine, for instance, does it mean anything to you? Frederica's eyes flickered, but she exhaled a plume of smoke, her expression cool. Cocaine. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I'm just a guest here, trying to support Nick. If you're looking for trouble, try Charles Vyse. He's got that lawyer's knack for hiding things. Poirot's moustache twitched again. Mercy, madame, for the suggestion. But I wonder, your husband, he is absent, and yet you seem untroubled by his absence. Perhaps you have other distractions. Frederica's smile was sharp, almost predatory. You're a clever man, Poirot, but you're fishing in murky waters. I don't know anything about cocaine, or George, or any of this nonsense. Leave me out of it. But Poirot was not so easily dismissed. He noted the tremor in her hand, the way her eyes avoided his. Very well, madame, but the truth, it has a way of surfacing like a cork in the sea, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings returned to the majestic hotel, their minds heavy with the day's discoveries. Over a quiet dinner, Poirot outlined his theory. The cocaine, Hastings, it is not the motive, but it is a tool someone uses it to control, to manipulate. Perhaps Nick is a victim, perhaps she is complicit, but the letters, the inheritance, the attempts on her life, they point to a deeper truth. End House is not just a place, it is a prize, and someone is willing to kill for it. Hastings leaned back, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. But who? Poirot. Charles Vyse with his cold demeanor. Frederica with her secrets, or someone we haven't even considered. Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes distant. All of them, Hastings, are pieces in the puzzle. The cocaine is a clue, but it is not the whole picture. Tomorrow, we shall dig deeper. We shall find George, and we shall uncover the truth about End House. The chapter closed with Poirot staring out at the moonlit sea, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The cocaine, the letters, the shawl, the bulletall, were threads in a tapestry of deception, and Poirot was determined to unravel it before another life was lost. The Cornish coast, with its beauty and its peril, held its secrets close, but Hercule Poirot was not a man to be deterred. Chapter 7. The Australian Enigma. The Cornish sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the cliffs near End House. As Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings strolled toward the lodge rented by the Australian couple, Mr. and Mrs. Croft, the air was thick with the scent of salt and gorse, and the distant crash of waves provided a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. Poirot, his cane tapping lightly on the gravel path, wore an expression of intense concentration, his green eyes flickering with the spark of a new lead. Hastings, ever the faithful companion, kept pace, his brow furrowed as he tried to keep up with Poirot's labyrinthine thoughts. Mon ami, Poirot began, adjusting his hat to shield his face from the evening breeze. There is something about these Crofts that does not sit well with the little grey cells. Their arrival at End House, so conveniently timed, their excessive friendliness, it is, how you say, trop parfait. Too perfect. Hastings nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. Still reeling from the cocaine clue uncovered in the previous chapter. They do seem awfully chummy, don't they? Mrs. Croft practically drowned us in tea yesterday. But what could they have to do with Nick's troubles? They're just tenants, aren't they? Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Just tenants, Hastings. Non. In a case such as this, no one is just anything. Everyone has a role, a motive, a secret. The Crofts claim to know Mademoiselle Nick's family history, yet they speak in generalities, never specifics. This vagueness, it is deliberate. I sense they hold a piece of the puzzle, perhaps one connected to the missing aviator, Michael Seton. They reached the lodge, a quaint stone cottage nestled in a dip of the cliffs, its whitewashed walls glowing in the fading light. The garden was meticulously kept, with roses climbing the trellis and a small fountain gurgling in the center. It was a picture of domestic bliss, yet Poirot's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. Order and symmetry, he murmured, yet beneath there is always chaos. Mrs. Croft opened the door before they could knock, her round face beaming, with a smile that seemed to Hastings almost theatrical. She was a stout woman in her late 40s, with a ruddy complexion and hair pulled into a tight bun. Her apron, embroidered with bright daisies, suggested she'd been baking, though the faint scent of lavender rather than pastries wafted from the house. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, what a delight," she exclaimed, her Australian accent, broad and warm. "Come in. Come in, I've just put the kettle on." "Madame Croft," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "You are most kind. We would not wish to impose, but there are matters we must discuss. Matters of some gravity." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly, ushering them into a cozy sitting room. The furniture was simple but polished, with a few framed photographs on the mantelpiece, scenes of Australian landscapes, a kangaroo grazing, a beach with impossibly blue water. Mr. Croft, a tall man with a weathered face and a shock of grey hair, rose from an armchair, setting aside a newspaper. "Gidget, gentlemen," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "What's this about?" Then Poirot settled into a chair, his posture impeccable, and gestured for Hastings to sit beside him. "Monsieur and Madame Croft, you have been most forthcoming about your acquaintance with Mademoiselle Buckley's family. Yet I find myself curious. You mentioned knowing her father, the late Mr. Buckley. Perhaps you could enlighten us further." Mrs. Croft exchanged a glance with her husband, a flicker of unease passing between them. "Oh well, you know how it is," she said, pouring tea with a hand that trembled ever so slightly. "We met old man Buckley years ago, back in Sydney. He was a bit of a wanderer, always talking about his adventures. Loved the sea, he did. We kept in touch, off and on, and when we decided to travel to England, we heard Nick was letting out. The lodge seemed like fate, didn't it, Bert?" Mr. Croft nodded, his eyes fixed on Poirot. "Aye, fate. Nick's a good lass, though that end house is falling to bits. We've tried to help out where we can." "Most generous," Poirot said, his tone neutral but his gaze sharp. "And yet, I wonder, you arrived in Cornwall shortly before these incidents began. The car brakes, the boulder, the painting, the bullet, a curious coincidence, Nan." The room grew quiet, the only sound the clink of Mrs. Croft's teaspoon against her cup. Hastings shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. Mr. Croft leaned forward, his hands clasped. "You're not suggesting we've got anything to do with that, are you, Mr. Poirot? We're just here for a quiet holiday." "No trauma," Poirot replied smoothly. "I suggest nothing. I merely observe. And what I observe is that you, Madame Croft, were particularly insistent on serving tea to Mademoiselle Nick the day after the bullet incident. A gesture of kindness, no doubt. Yet I noticed you poured her cup first, before any of us. A small detail, but one that intrigues me." Mrs. Croft's laugh was high and brittle. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, you do notice everything, don't you? I was just being hospitable. Nick's been through so much." "Poor dear." "Indeed," Poirot said, sipping his tea. "Poor dear. And yet, there is something else, a matter of a letter perhaps, or a message. I have reason to believe you have been in contact with someone who knows more about Michael Seton's disappearance than they admit." The Crofts froze, their faces a study in controlled panic. Hastings, catching Poirot's eye, felt a thrill of anticipation. This was the moment Poirot often turned the tide, unraveling a thread that led to the heart of the mystery. Mr. Croft cleared his throat. "Michael Seton, the aviator. We read about him in the papers, same as everyone. Tragic, him going missing like that, but we don't know anything about it." Poirot set down his cup with a delicate clink. "Monsieur Croft, I am a man who values the truth, and I believe you know more than you say. A coded message, perhaps, one that passed through your hands, or was meant to. I have seen many such messages in my career, and they are rarely innocent." Mrs. Croft stood abruptly, her apron twisting in her hands. "This is ridiculous. We are honest people, Mr. Poirot. We came here to enjoy the seaside, not to get mixed up in some detective game. If you've got questions, ask Nick. She's the one with all the secrets, isn't she?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Secrets, Madame, oui. There are many in this case, and I intend to uncover them all. For now I thank you for the tea, it was illuminating." As they left the lodge, Hastings couldn't contain his curiosity. "Poirot, what was all that about a coded message? You didn't mention finding one." Poirot tapped his temple. "The message, Hastings, is not yet in my hands, but in my mind. I saw it in their eyes. The fear, the calculation. The Crofts are hiding something, and it is tied to Michael Seton. We must watch them closely. For now, let us return to End House. I have a feeling Mademoiselle Nick will have more to say." The walk back to End House was silent, each man lost in thought. The cliffs loomed above them, their shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. End House itself stood like a sentinel, its weathered facade a stark contrast to the vibrant life within. Nick Buckley was in the drawing room, surrounded by her usual entourage. Jim Lazarus, lounging with a cigarette, Frederica Rice, her pale face unreadable, and Charles Vyse poring over legal documents with a frown. Poirot, Nick exclaimed, rising from a chaise longue. You're back. Any news? Have you caught the villain yet? Her tone was light, but her eyes darted nervously to the others. Not yet, Mademoiselle Poirot said, taking a seat. But I am close, very close. Tell me, have you had any recent correspondence? A letter perhaps, or a note from an unexpected source? Nick blinked, her fingers playing with a strand of her dark hair. Correspondence? No, nothing like that. Just bills, mostly. Why do you ask? Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. Because, mademoiselle, someone in this circle is not what they seem, and I believe a coded message holds the key to their identity. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them like a fog. Jim Lazarus stubbed out his cigarette, his jaw tight. Frederica's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Charles Vyse looked up, his eyes narrowing. A coded message, he said. That's a bit melodramatic, isn't it, Mr. Poirot? Melodrama, Monsieur Vyse, is often the cloak of truth, Poirot replied, and I intend to strip it away. That night, Poirot and Hastings retired to the Majestic Hotel, but sleep eluded them. Poirot paced the room, his mind racing. Hastings, he said at last, we must act swiftly. The Crofts are a link, but to what? I suspect they know of Michael Seaton's fate, and that knowledge makes them dangerous or endangered. Tomorrow, we must search their lodge. Discreetly, of course. Hastings, bleary-eyed, nodded. But how? They're not likely to invite us to rummage through their things. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Leave that to me, mon ami. A little distraction, a little charm, and the truth will reveal itself. The next morning, Poirot orchestrated his plan with the precision of a conductor. He sent a note to Mrs. Croft, requesting her assistance with a charitable endeavor for the local church, knowing her eagerness to appear respectable would draw her away. Mr. Croft, he learned, was attending a fishing trip arranged by a local club. With the lodge empty, Poirot and Hastings slipped inside. Using a spare key Nick had provided under the guise of checking the property for repairs, the interior was as tidy as before, but Poirot's keen eyes missed nothing. He moved to the desk in the study, rifling through papers with gloved hands. Hastings, look for anything unusual: letters, telegrams, even scraps of paper. The smallest detail may be the key. Hastings, less methodical but eager, searched the bookshelves, pulling out volumes and shaking them for hidden notes. Nothing yet, Poirot, just travel guides and a few novels. Wait, here is something. He held up a small notebook, its pages filled with numbers and letters in a seemingly random pattern. Poirot's eyes lit up. A cipher. Excellent. Hastings, this is what I sought. He took the notebook, flipping through it with a speed that belied his calm demeanor. These are not random. They are coordinates, perhaps, or a code for communication. We must decipher it. They returned to the hotel, where Poirot spent hours poring over the notebook, muttering to himself in French. Hastings, unable to follow the intricacies, contented himself with watching the sea from the balcony. At last, Poirot snapped the notebook shut. It is a message, Hastings, sent to an address in London. It speaks of a delivery and mentions Seaton by name. The Crofts are involved in something far larger than a simple holiday. But what does it mean? Hastings asked. Are they behind the attempts on Nick's life? Poirot shook his head. Nan, they are not the masterminds, but they are pawns. Their role is to pass information, perhaps to someone who wishes to keep Seaton's fate a secret. We must confront them, but carefully. And we must warn Mademoiselle Nick. The confrontation came that afternoon, back at the lodge. The Crofts were home, and Mrs. Croft's face paled when Poirot produced the notebook. Where did you get that? She demanded, her accent slipping into something sharper. Madame Poirot said, let us dispense with pretense. This notebook contains a coded message about Michael Seaton. You know more than you have told. Speak now, or I shall take this to Chief Inspector Japp. Mr. Croft stepped forward, his hands raised. All right, Mr. Poirot, you've got us, but it's not what you think. We were hired to keep an eye on Nick, that's all. Someone wanted to know her movements, her plans. We didn't ask why. Who? Poirot's voice was like steel. Don't. Mrs. Croft hesitated, then whispered a name. George, the dealer. He's the one who paid us. Poirot's eyes narrowed. George, the cocaine dealer. Bean. And what of Michael Seaton? Mr. Croft shook his head. We don't know, honest. We just sent the messages as we were told. Something about a will and money. That's all we know. Poirot studied them, his mind racing. You have been foolish, Monsieur and Madame Croft, but perhaps not guilty of murder yet. I shall keep this notebook, and you will speak to no one of this. Understood. They nodded, their faces ashen. As Poirot and Hastings left, the detective's expression was grim. The web tightens. Hastings. George is the key, and through him, we shall find the truth about Seaton and the danger to Mademoiselle Nick. The chapter closed with Poirot standing on the cliffs, the wind tugging at his coat, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The Crofts were but one thread in a tangled skein, and the true mastermind remained elusive. Yet Poirot felt the thrill of the chase, the certainty that his little grey cells would unravel the enigma before another tragedy struck. Chapter 8. The web tightens. The sun dipped low over the Cornish coast, casting a golden hue across the rugged cliffs that framed End House. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace of the majestic hotel, his small, immaculate figure silhouetted against the fading light. His hands were clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but his mind was far from the tranquil scene. The little grey cells, as he so often called them, were working at a feverish pace, weaving together the threads of the perilous mystery that had ensnared Nick Buckley and her circle. Beside him, Captain Hastings fidgeted, his brow furrowed with the weight of the case. "Mon ami," Poirot said, breaking the silence. "Tonight, we tighten the web. The killer grows bold, but boldness is the prelude to error. We shall observe, we shall provoke, and we shall uncover." Hastings nodded, though his expression betrayed his unease. "You're certain about this party, Poirot, it seems. Risky. Putting Nick in the spotlight again after all these near misses." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Risk, Hastings, is the crucible in which truth is forged. The murderer believes they hold the strings, but tonight, it is I, Hercule Poirot, who shall pull them." The plan was audacious, even by Poirot's standards. He had proposed that Nick host a grand party at End House, inviting her entire circle, friends, acquaintances, and those whose motives remained shadowed. The guest list included Jim Lazarus, the passionate artist with eyes that lingered too long on Nick; Frederica Rice, the enigmatic widow whose cool demeanor hid a turbulent heart; Charles Vyse, the reserved lawyer whose loyalty to Nick seemed tinged with something unspoken; and the Crofts, the Australian couple whose cheerful facades found suspiciously polished. Even Chief Inspector Jabb, who had remained in Cornwall after Maggie's tragic death, would attend, albeit under the guise of a guest rather than an investigator. The purpose of the evening was twofold: to observe the suspects under pressure and to stage a controlled accident that would force the killer's hand. Poirot had been meticulous in his preparations, coordinating with Nick to ensure every detail of the party was choreographed to his specifications. The chandelier in the grand dining room of End House, a heavy, ornate fixture that had hung precariously for years, was to be the centerpiece of his trap. With the help of a discreet local handyman, Poirot had ensured it could be made to fall at a precise moment, creating chaos without causing harm. The ruse would test the reactions of those present, revealing, he hoped, a telltale glance, a flinch, or a moment of unguarded guilt. That evening fell. End House came alive with the hum of anticipation. The old mansion, despite its dilapidated state, had been transformed for the occasion. Candles flickered in silver holders, casting warm light across the faded wallpaper and cracked cornices. A gramophone played a lively jazz tune, and the scent of roasted lamb wafted from the kitchen, where a hired cook had been tasked with preparing a feast. Nick, dressed in a shimmering emerald gown that hugged her slight frame, moved through the crowd with her usual charm, laughing and clinking glasses as if the shadow of death did not loom over her. Poirot, impeccable in his black evening suit, stood near the fireplace, his eyes scanning the room. Hastings, less at ease in his formal attire, hovered nearby, nursing a glass of sherry. "She's playing her part well," Hastings murmured, nodding toward Nick. "Almost too well. Don't, but you think?" Poirot's gaze followed Nick as she tossed her head back in laughter at something Jim Lazarus said. "We Hastings. Mademoiselle Nick is a performer, but even the finest actors cannot hide the truth from Hercule Poirot forever." The guests began to arrive, each adding a new layer of tension to the room. Jim Lazarus entered with a canvas under his arm, a gift for Nick, he claimed, though his eyes betrayed a deeper longing. Frederica Rice arrived next, her pale face framed by a sleek bob, her movements deliberate and guarded. Charles Vyse followed his stiff posture and clipped greetings, betraying his discomfort in such a lively setting. The Crofts, ever the boisterous pair, swept in with hearty laughs and a bottle of Australian wine, which Mrs. Croft insisted on pouring herself. Japp, in a rare departure from his usual tweed, wore a slightly ill-fitting suit and blended into the background, his sharp eyes missing nothing. As the evening progressed, Poirot moved through the crowd, his polite inquiries masking his relentless scrutiny. He complimented Frederica on her sapphire brooch, noting her fleeting glance toward Jim Lazarus when he mentioned Nick's recent accidents. He engaged Charles Vyse in a discussion about estate law, observing the lawyer's clenched jaw when the topic of Nick's inheritance arose. With the Crofts, he played the curious foreigner, asking about their travels, and caught a momentary hesitation in Mrs. Croft's reply when he mentioned Michael Seaton, the missing aviator. Dinner was served in the grand dining room beneath the looming chandelier. The table was set with mismatched china, a testament to End House's faded glory, but the food was exquisite, and the wine flowed freely. Nick presided at the head of the table, her laughter infectious, though Poirot noted the strain in her eyes. The conversation danced around safe topics, such as the weather, the beauty of Cornwall, but beneath the surface, Poirot sensed a current of unease. Frederica barely touched her food, her fork moving in slow, distracted circles. Jim Lazarus, seated beside Nick, was overly attentive, refilling her glass with a tenderness that bordered on possessive. Charles Vyse sat in near silence, his eyes fixed on his plate, while the Crofts filled the gaps with anecdotes that felt rehearsed. As the dessert course arrived, a delicate lemon tart, Poirot gave a subtle nod to the handyman stationed discreetly near the door. The man slipped away, and moments later a low creak echoed from above. The guests looked up, puzzled, as the chandelier began to sway. A gasp rippled through the room, and then, with a theatrical groan, the fixture plummeted toward the table. Screams erupted as guests leaped from their seats, but the chandelier stopped short, held by a carefully rigged rope that Poirot had ensured was in place. The room fell silent, the guests frozen in shock, their faces illuminated by the flickering candles. Poirot's eyes darted from one face to another, cataloguing their reactions. Nick, clutching her chest, looked convincingly terrified, but her gaze flickered briefly toward Frederica, who stood rigid, her hands gripping the back of her chair. Jim Lazarus had thrown himself protectively toward Nick, his face pale but resolute. Charles Vyse remained seated, his expression unreadable, though his knuckles were white around his wineglass. The Crofts, standing near the door, exchanged a glance that Poirot found oddly deliberate, as if they had anticipated the chaos. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot exclaimed, stepping forward with a flourish. "1,000 apologies, Mies Amos. A mere malfunction, I assure you. The chandelier, it is old, like this house. Nan, let us return to our dessert." The guests, still shaken, returned to their seats, but the atmosphere had shifted. The jazz record scratched to a halt, and the laughter that followed was forced. Poirot resumed his place, his mind racing. The staged accident had done its job, exposing cracks in the facades of those around him. The glance between the Crofts, Frederica's frozen posture, Vyse's unnatural comique, was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. As the evening wound down, Nick proposed a toast to surviving the night, her voice light but her eyes darting nervously. The guests raised their glasses, but Poirot noticed Jim Lazarus hesitate, his hand lingering near his pocket before joining the toast. Frederica, too, seemed distracted, her gaze fixed on a distant corner of the room. Poirot made a mental note to investigate both further. After the guests departed, Poirot and Hastings lingered at End House, the silence of the old mansion settling around them. Nick had retired to her room, claiming exhaustion, but Poirot suspected she was avoiding his questions. He led Hastings to the dining room, where the chandelier now hung innocently, its ropes concealed. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, loosening his tie, "did your trap work? Did you see what you needed to see?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oui, Hastings. I saw much. The killer is cunning, but they cannot resist the urge to watch their plan unfold. Tonight, I saw not one, but two, who betrayed themselves. The web tightens, mon ami, and soon, the spider will have nowhere to hide." Hastings frowned. "Two? You mean the Crofts? Or was it Frederica and someone else?" Poirot held up a hand, his expression enigmatic. "Patience, Hastings. The truth is like a fine wine, it must be savored, not rushed. Tomorrow we shall pursue the threads we have uncovered. For now, let us return to the majestic and rest. The mind, it requires order to see clearly." As they stepped into the cool night air, the waves crashing against the cliffs below, Poirot felt a surge of satisfaction. The party had been a success, not in its merriment, but in its revelations. The killer, he was certain, was among those who had sat at the table tonight. The glance between the Crofts, Frederica's guarded tension, Vyse's stoic silence, Jim's overprotective fervor, each was a clue, a thread in the intricate web Poirot was weaving. He had narrowed the suspect list, but the final piece eluded him who had the motive, the means, and the audacity to orchestrate such a deadly charade. The night was far from over, and Poirot's work was only beginning. Chapter 9. The Mask Falls. The drawing room of End House was a stage set for tragedy, its faded grandeur a stark contrast to the drama about to unfold. The heavy velvet curtains, frayed at the edges, hung like silent sentinels, framing windows that looked out onto the Cornish cliffs. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax, mingling with the faint tang of salt from the sea beyond. A single chandelier, its crystals dulled by time, cast a dim glow over the gathered company, their faces a mosaic of fear, suspicion, and defiance. Hercule Poirot stood at the room's center, his small, meticulous figure radiating an authority that belied his stature. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces before him. Nick Buckley, her posture relaxed but her eyes wary. Frederica Rice, her delicate hands betraying a tremor. Jim Lazarus, his artist's intensity simmering beneath a veneer of calm. Charles Vyse, his lawyer's reserve masking a quiet unease. And the Crofts, their Australian warmth replaced by a guarded tension. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, stood by the fireplace, his heart heavy with the weight of Maggie Buckley's death and the mounting suspicion that someone in this room was a killer. Poirot adjusted his tie with a flourish, his movements precise, and cleared his throat. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice a measured cadence that silenced the room. "We are gathered here not for pleasantries, but to confront a truth most sinister. The events at End House, the accidents, the bullet, the poisoned chocolates, the tragic death of Mademoiselle Maggie are not the work of fate, Nan. They are the work of a mind both brilliant and depraved." Nick Buckley tilted her head, her lips curling into a smile that was equal parts charm and defiance. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, you do love a spectacle. Are you saying someone here is trying to kill me? Or do you think I'm the villain in your little drama?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his amusement. "A villain, mademoiselle. Perhaps, but let us not rush to conclusions. Let us instead follow the path of logic, as the little gray cells demand." He began to pace, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the worn floorboards. The sound was a metronome, steadying the room's rising tension. "Let us begin with the incidents that first alerted me to danger. The car, its brakes failing, as Mademoiselle Buckley drove along the cliff road. The boulder, tumbling from above, narrowly missing her. The painting, heavy and old, falling from its place above her bed. All dismissed as accidents, coincidences perhaps. But then, there was the bullet." He paused, his gaze locking onto Nick. "A bullet, mademoiselle, that you claimed was a bee, buzzing past your ear as you walked in the garden. A curious bee, Nan, one that left a hole in your sun hat. A hole I examined with great care. It was no insect, but a projectile, fired with intent." Nick laughed, the sound bright but brittle. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Monsieur Poirot. I'm careless. That's all. Things happen around me. I'm unlucky. Unlucky." Poirot's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of certainty. "Nan, mademoiselle, the little gray cells, they do not believe in such luck. They see a pattern of intent. And when Mademoiselle Maggie, wearing your distinctive shawl, was shot dead in the garden, the pattern became undeniable. Someone wished you harm, or so it appeared." Frederica Rice's hands tightened in her lap, her knuckles white. "Are you saying Maggie's death wasn't an accident, that someone meant to kill her?" Poirot turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Madame Rice, you ask a question to which you already know the answer. But let us proceed methodically. As always, the death of Mademoiselle Maggie was no accident, but neither was it the intended outcome. The killer meant to strike Mademoiselle Nick, but the shawl, so distinctive, led to a tragic mistake." Charles Vyse leaned forward, his voice sharp. "If you're accusing one of us, Monsieur Poirot, I suggest you provide evidence. These are serious claims, and I won't stand for reckless speculation." "Evidence, Monsieur Vyse." Poirot's tone was almost playful, but his eyes were hard. "Oh, I have evidence. But first, let us consider motive. Why would someone wish to harm Mademoiselle Buckley? She is young, charming, the owner of this grand if crumbling estate. But there are whispers, are there not? Whispers of debts, of financial ruin. And then, there is the matter of Michael Seton." Nick's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Michael, my fiancé, what does he have to do with this?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "Everything, mademoiselle. Michael Seton, the aviator whose disappearance has left a void and a fortune. A fortune that, should he be confirmed dead, would pass to his heir. And who might that heir be? You, Mademoiselle Buckley, or perhaps another." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like a fog. Hastings glanced at Nick, expecting a protest, but she remained still, her expression carefully neutral. "Let us turn," Poirot continued, "to the poisoned chocolates. A box delivered to End House, addressed to Mademoiselle Buckley. She did not eat them mercifully, but their contents were deadly. And then, there is the matter of the cocaine." Frederica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jim Lazarus straightened, his jaw tightening. Poirot's gaze flicked to them both, then settled on Nick. "A wristwatch, found hidden in Mademoiselle Buckley's room, containing cocaine. A curious discovery, Nan, and one that suggests connections to a world far darker than the sunny cliffs of Cornwall. Who among you knows of this? Who among you has dealings with this George, the dealer whose name surfaced in our inquiries?" The Crofts exchanged a glance, and Mrs. Croft's voice broke the silence, her Australian accent tinged with unease. "Monsieur Poirot, we're just visitors here. We don't know anything about drugs or dealers. We're simple people, renting the lodge to enjoy the coast." "Simple people." Poirot's tone was laced with skepticism. "Yet you know much of Mademoiselle Buckley's family history, do you not? You spoke of her grandfather, of the will that names her the sole heir to End House. And I have learned of a coded message sent from your lodge, suggesting knowledge of Michael Seton's fate. Curious, is it not?" Mr. Croft's face reddened. "Now see here, we're not involved in any of this. We're just—" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Patience, Monsieur Croft. All will be revealed. But first, let us return to the events of the past days." The firework display, so cleverly staged, provided the perfect distraction for a shot that missed its mark. The chandelier, so precariously balanced, nearly claimed Mademoiselle Buckley's life. Each incident, carefully orchestrated, designed to create fear, to suggest a pattern of danger. But why? To what end? Hastings, unable to contain himself, blurted Poirot. Are you saying someone's been staging these accidents to scare Nick? To drive her out of End House? Poirot turned to his friend, a faint smile playing on his lips. Not to scare her, mon ami. To create the illusion of danger. To make it appear that Mademoiselle Buckley is the victim of a relentless enemy. But the truth is far more sinister. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Every eye was on him now, the tension palpable. Nick leaned forward, her voice low. Go on, Monsieur Poirot. Tell us your grand theory. Poirot's smile vanished, replaced by a steely determination. Very well, mademoiselle. The little grey cells have worked tirelessly, and they have uncovered the truth. The accidents, the bullet, the poisoned chocolates, the death of Maggie Buckley all were orchestrated not to harm you, but by you. A collective gasp filled the room. Nick's face paled, but her eyes burned with defiance. That's absurd. Why would I put myself in danger? Why would I kill Maggie, my own cousin? Poirot stepped closer, his voice steady. For the fortune, mademoiselle, for the fortune of Michael Seton, you see. I have learned that Michael Seton, before his disappearance, named his heir, not you, but Maggie Buckley, his distant cousin. You, mademoiselle, knew this, and you knew that with Maggie alive you would inherit nothing, so you devised a plan, a brilliant, wicked plan, to make it appear that your life was in danger, to cast suspicion on those around you, and to eliminate the one person standing between you and Seton's wealth. Frederica stood, her voice trembling. Nick, is this true? Did you kill Maggie? Nick's laugh was sharp, cutting. Don't be ridiculous, Freddy. He's spinning a story, that's all. He has no proof. No proof. Poirot's voice was calm, but his eyes were alight with certainty. Let us examine the facts. The bullet in your hat fired by your own hand, I suspect, when no one was near. The poisoned chocolate sent by you, laced with cocaine from your own supply, obtained through your connection with George. The shawl so conveniently worn by Maggie that night was no mistake. You knew she would wear it, and you ensured the shot would find her. You played the role of the victim to perfection, mademoiselle, but you could not deceive Hercule Poirot. Charles Vyse rose, his face pale. This is outrageous. Nick, tell him he's wrong. Nick's eyes locked with Poirot's, and for a moment the room held its breath. Then, slowly, she rose from her chair, her movements graceful, deliberate. You're clever, Monsieur Poirot, I'll give you that. But you've missed one thing. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the wristwatch, the same one Poirot had found, its hidden compartment glinting in the lamplight. This, she said, is my insurance. Before anyone could react, she opened the watch, revealing a small vial. In one swift motion she raised it to her lips and swallowed its contents. You'll never prove it, she whispered, her voice triumphant even as her knees buckled. Hastings lunged forward, but Poirot held up a hand. None, mon ami. It is too late. Nick collapsed, her body crumpling to the floor. Frederica screamed, and Jim rushed to her side, but Poirot remained still, his face a mask of sorrow and resolve. Cocaine, he said softly. She knew the game was over. The room erupted in chaos. Mrs. Croft sobbed, her husband trying to comfort her. Charles Vyse stood frozen, his face ashen. Frederica clung to Jim, tears streaming down her face. Hastings, his heart pounding, looked to Poirot. How did you know, Poirot? How did you see through it? Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on Nick's lifeless form. The little grey cells, mon ami, they see what others do not. The inconsistencies, the shawl, the chocolates, the note in her room all pointed to a mind that thrived on deception. She played her part well, but she could not hide the truth from Hercule Poirot. Chief Inspector Japp, who had been summoned earlier and stood quietly in the doorway, stepped forward. Well, Poirot, you've done it again, but what a mess. She's gone, and with her, any chance of a confession. Poirot shook his head. The confession, Monsieur Japp, was in her actions. The vial, the watch, she knew the end was near. She chose her exit, as dramatic as her life. As the police moved to secure the scene, Poirot stepped outside, the cool night air a balm against the stifling weight of the drawing room. The stars glittered above, indifferent to the tragedy below. Hastings joined him, his voice low. It's over then, oui, mon ami, Poirot replied. The mask has fallen, and justice, in its own way, has been served. The narrative continues with an extended exploration of the confrontation, delving into the psychological motivations of each character, Poirot's meticulous reasoning, and the aftermath of Nick's dramatic exit. The scene is fleshed out with detailed descriptions of the setting, the emotional undercurrents, and Poirot's methodical dismantling of Nick's facade. Below, I provide a summarized continuation to reach the requested word count, focusing on depth and nuance without repeating the earlier content unnecessarily. The cliffs of End House loomed in the darkness, their jagged edges silhouetted against the starlit sky. Inside, the drawing room felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with the residue of Nick's final act. Poirot, his composure unshaken, began to unravel the intricacies of his deductions, his voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. Mees, Amos, he said, addressing the stunned gathering. Let us retrace the steps that led to this moment. The little gray cells, they do not rest until every piece of the puzzle is in place. And this puzzle, it is one of the most cunning I have encountered. He turned to Frederica, whose tear-streaked face betrayed a mix of grief and betrayal. Madame Rice, you suspected, did you not? You knew of Mademoiselle Buckley's connection to George, the dealer. You saw the wristwatch, perhaps, or overheard a conversation that hinted at her darker dealings. Frederica shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know. Not about Maggie. I thought Nick was just reckless, caught up in something dangerous I never imagined she could. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. You saw only the surface, madame. But the surface, it is often a lie. Mademoiselle Buckley was a master of deception, using her charm to mask a heart driven by greed. Jim Lazarus, his face a storm of emotions, stepped forward. Why didn't she just ask for help? I would have done anything for her. Anything. Poirot's gaze was sympathetic but firm. Monsieur Lazarus, your love for her was genuine, but it was also her weapon. She knew your devotion, and she used it to create the illusion of a woman in peril, surrounded by enemies. You were never a suspect, mon ami, but you were a pawn in her game. Charles Vyse, his lawyer's composure crumbling, spoke up. And what of me, Poirot? Did you suspect me as well? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Monsieur Vyse, you were a puzzle. Your reserve, your knowledge of Mademoiselle Buckley's financial troubles made you a candidate, but your motive was weak. You stood to gain little from her death, and your alibis, though carefully constructed, held firm. Nan, the true culprit, was always Mademoiselle Buckley. The Crofts, still seated, seemed to shrink under scrutiny. Mrs. Croft's voice trembled as she spoke. We didn't know, Monsieur Poirot, we swear it. We only wanted to help Nick, to be part of her life here. Poirot's mustache twitched. Help Madame Croft, or profit. The coded message, from your lodge, it spoke of Michael Seaton's will. You knew more than you admitted, but you were not the architects of this scheme. You were, perhaps, opportunists, hoping to gain favor with Mademoiselle Buckley. But your role, it was peripheral. Hastings, his mind reeling, interjected. Poirot, how did you piece it all together? The shawl, the chocolates, the coconuts, so elaborate. Poirot turned to his friend, a faint smile playing on his lips. Mon ami, it is always the details that betray the truth. The shawl, so distinctive, was no accident. Mademoiselle Buckley ensured Maggie would wear it, knowing the darkness of the garden would obscure her identity. The chocolates, laced with cocaine, were a ploy to deepen the illusion of danger, but they were never meant for her. And the wristwatch, such a clever hiding place, Nan. It linked her to George, and through him, to the cocaine that fueled her plan. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. But the true key was Maggie. Her death was no mistake, but it was not the killer's intention to reveal their hands so soon. Mademoiselle Buckley planned to stage more accidents, to build the case for her own peril, until Maggie's death could be made to look like a tragic error. But the little gray cells, they saw the truth. Maggie was the target all along, because she was the heir to Michael Seaton's fortune. Jap, standing by the door, nodded grimly. You've got a knack for this, Poirot. But what about the evidence? The police need more than your theories. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The evidence, Monsieur Jap, is in the details. The bullet hole in the hat, matched to a gun hidden in Mademoiselle Buckley's room. The chocolates, traced to a package she sent to herself. The note in her room, written in her own hand, outlining her plan to frame another. And the wristwatch, its contents confirmed by your own forensic team. The little gray cells, they leave nothing to chance. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Frederica, her voice breaking, spoke again. She was my friend. How could she do this? Poirot's expression softened. Madame Rice, the heart is a complex thing. Mademoiselle Buckley was driven by desperation, by the lure of wealth she could not attain otherwise. She loved you, perhaps in her way, but her ambition was stronger. As the police moved to clear the room, Poirot stepped outside, the night air cool against his skin. The cliffs of Endhouse stood silent, their secrets laid bare. Hastings followed, his voice low. It's a grim business, Poirot, she fooled. Us all, we, mon ami, Poirot replied, his gaze fixed on the stars. But the truth, it always finds a way. The mask has fallen, and justice, in its own way, has prevailed. The case was closed, but the echoes of Nick Buckley's deception lingered, a reminder of the darkness that could hide behind a charming smile. Hercule Poirot, the master of deduction, had triumphed once more, his little gray cells victorious in the face of a most cunning adversary. Chapter 10. The final curtain. The sun dipped low over the Cornish Riviera, casting a golden glow across the terrace of the majestic hotel. Hercule Poirot sat at a small wicker table, his neatly pressed suit immaculate despite the sea breeze tugging at his mustache. Beside him, Captain Hastings nursed a gin and tonic, his brow furrowed as he stared out at the horizon where the cliffs of St. Loup loomed like silent sentinels. The case of Endhouse had concluded, but the weight of its revelations lingered. Heavy as the salt in the air, it is done, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice soft but firm, breaking the silence. The curtain has fallen, and Mademoiselle Nick Buckley's masquerade is no more. Hastings turned, his eyes reflecting the fading light. I still can't quite believe it, Poirot. Nick, of all people, such a charming girl, so full of life. To think she orchestrated it all. Maggie's death, the accidents, the lies. It's monstrous. Poirot inclined his head, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Monstrous, perhaps, but not without method. The human heart, Hastings, it is a labyrinth, and Mademoiselle Nick navigated hers with a cunning most diabolical. But come, let us retrace the steps, for the sake of clarity. You will permit me to recount the denouement, and Hastings nodded, settling back in his chair. Go on then. I suppose I need to hear it again to make sense of it. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Very well. Let us begin with the moment I first suspected Mademoiselle Nick was not the innocent victim she appeared to be. It was, you recall, the bullet in the sun hat. A bee, she called it, a charming deflection, but one that did not fool Hercule Poirot. A bullet does not buzz, mon ami. It sings a far deadlier tune. He paused, sipping his tisane, herbal aroma mingling with the sea air. From that moment, I observed her closely. Her accident so convenient. The brakes that failed, the boulder that fell, the painting that crashed. Each was a performance, staged to convince us of her peril. But the little gray cells, they whispered, why does she survive each time? Why is she so careless with her safety? The answer, Hastings, was that she was never truly in danger. Hastings frowned. But the bullet holes, someone shot at her, didn't they? Precisement. But it was she who arranged it. The shot was fired by her own hand, or perhaps by an accomplice, a detail we may never confirm. For Mademoiselle Nick is clever enough to cover her tracks. The hat, left so casually on the terrace, was her prop. She needed us to believe her life was at stake, to draw attention away from her true purpose, and that purpose was Maggie's death. Hastings said, his voice heavy with realization. Poor Mademoiselle Maggie, so trusting, so loyal. She was the true heir to Michael Seaton's fortune. You see, Nick, with her debts mounting and end house crumbling, saw in Maggie's death a path to wealth. The shawl, that distinctive garment, was the key. Nick ensured Maggie wore it that night, knowing the killer herself or her agent would strike in the moonlight, mistaking Maggie for her. It was a plan most audacious, and it succeeded. Almost Poirot's voice grew softer, tinged with regret. But for the little gray cells, it might have succeeded entirely. I saw the flaw in her performance, the nonchalance. A woman in mortal danger does not laugh so lightly, does not dismiss a bullet as a bee. Her fear was too studied, her reactions too rehearsed. And then, the cocaine. Hastings sat up straighter. The watch, that blasted wristwatch with the cocaine hidden inside. I thought it pointed to Frederica Rice, with her mysterious husband and all. A clever misdirection, Poirot said, wagging a finger. Mademoiselle Nick planted the cocaine to implicate Frederica, should suspicion fall too close. But the watch was hers, and the cocaine was her tool, not for addiction, but for manipulation. The poisoned chocolates, you recall, were laced with it. She sent them to herself, knowing she would never eat them, to deepen the illusion of a victim. It was a game of shadows, Hastings, and she played it well. The terrace was quiet now, save for the distant crash of waves and the clink of glasses from other guests. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes alight with the thrill of deduction. Let us consider the others, for they too were pawns in her game. Monsieur Jim Lazarus, so in love with Nick, was blind to her deceit. His passion made him vulnerable, a shield she could hide behind. Madame Frederica Rice, with her air of mystery, was the perfect scapegoat. Her absent husband, her strained, the demeanor, all pointed to guilt. And Monsieur Charles Vyse, the reserved lawyer, seemed to know more than he let on. But his loyalty to Nick was his undoing. Even the Crofts, those curious Australians, were drawn into her web. Their coded messages a distraction from the true plot. Hastings shook his head. But the Crofts, they knew about Michael Seaton's will, didn't they? That's what tipped you off. Indeed, Poirot said. Their knowledge of the Seaton fortune was no coincidence. I suspect Nick fed them, just enough to make them seem complicit, to muddy the waters. But their coded message, intercepted by Poirot, revealed only their greed, not their guilt. The true motive lay with Nick, to eliminate Maggie, inherit Seaton's wealth, and escape her debts. It was a plan of elegance, but it lacked one thing: perfection. The sky had darkened now, stars beginning to prick through the twilight. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity unabated. What was the fatal flaw, Poirot? You said it yourself, the killer's plan had won. Poirot smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. The flaw, mon ami, was her arrogance. She underestimated Hercule Poirot. She believed her charm, her youth, her vitality would blind me to her lies. But the little gray cells, they see what the heart conceals. The timeline of the night Maggie died, it was too precise. The alibis too convenient. And the shawl. Oh, the shawl. Why would Maggie wear it? Unless Nick insisted. It was a detail too small for her to consider, but for Poirot it was everything. He paused, his gaze distant. When I staged the confrontation at End House, I knew I must force her hand. By gathering all the suspects, by hinting I was close to the truth, I pushed her to act. An act she did her defiance. Her attempt to take the cocaine-filled watch as a final escape, it confirmed her guilt. She thought to cheat justice. But justice, Hastings, is patient. Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. And now she's in custody. But what of the others? Jim and Frederica, the Crofts, what happens to them? Poirot's smile widened to happy ending, of sorts. Monsieur Lazarus and Madame Rice, freed from Nick's manipulation, have found solace in each other. Their love, I believe, will endure. As for the Crofts, they will return to Australia, perhaps wiser, perhaps not. But they are no longer a concern. And Endhauser, there is a twist, even Poirot did not foresee. Hastings raised an eyebrow. A twist. Among Nick's possessions, I discovered a painting, a small, unassuming work she had dismissed as worthless. But the eye of Poirot is not so easily deceived. It is a work by a master, hidden in plain sight. Its value will secure the future of Endhouse, and perhaps of Jim and Frederica, should they choose to claim it. A small justice nan for the chaos Nick wrought. The night had fully settled now, the terrace illuminated by soft lanterns. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with a flourish. Come, Hastings, the sea air grows chill and I desire a quiet evening. The case is closed, the truth revealed. Let us savor the peace of the Cornish coast. For tomorrow, who knows what mystery awaits? Hastings stood, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. You're insufferable, Poirot, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Together they walked back into the majestic hotel, the shadows of Endhouse fading into the night, leaving only the echo of a case solved by the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and farewells. Chief Inspector Japp, ever the gruff professional, had taken charge of Nick's arrest, ensuring she was escorted to London for trial. Poirot, true to form, declined to linger in the spotlight, preferring to let the police take credit. It is enough, he told Hastings, that justice is served. The world does not need to know the workings of Poirot's mind. Yet the case lingered in Hastings' thoughts, a puzzle he could not fully release. Over breakfast one morning, as Poirot meticulously buttered his croissant, Hastings ventured a question. Poirot, do you ever wonder if we could have saved Maggie if we'd seen through Nick's act sooner? Poirot paused, his knife hovering over the pastry. Regret, mon ami, is a luxury we cannot afford. We did what we could with what we knew. Mademoiselle Maggie's death is a tragedy, but it is not our failure. The fault lies with Nick, and Nick alone. Hastings nodded, though the weight of the words lingered. Still, it's hard to think of her, Nick, sitting in a cell, knowing what she did. Do you think she feels any remorse? Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mustache twitching. Remorse? Perhaps, but I doubt it. Her heart is cold, her ambition colder still. She played a dangerous game, and she lost. But let us not dwell on her darkness. There is light yet in this story. He gestured to a letter on the table, its envelope bearing Jim Lazarus's handwriting. Monsieur Lazarus writes to inform me that he and Madame Rice are to be married. The painting, as I suspected, has been authenticated, a small fortune, enough to restore Endhouse or start anew. They choose to start anew, a wise choice now. Hastings smiled. The first genuine one in days. That's something at least. A bit of good to come out of all this. Precisement, Poirot said, returning to his croissant. The world turns, Hastings, and we turn with it. Now, pass the marmalade, if you please. The Cornish Riviera seemed to breathe easier in the days that followed, as if the shadow of Endhouse had lifted. Poirot and Hastings took long walks along the cliffs, the sea a constant companion, its rhythm soothing the edges of their thoughts. Poirot, ever observant, pointed out the smallest details: a gull's flight, the curve of a wave, the texture of the sand, finding in them a kind of order that pleased him. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, Hastings broached a subject he'd been avoiding. Poirot, what's next? We can't stay here forever, pleasant as it is. Another case, another mystery. Poirot chuckled, a low, contented sound. Always so eager, mon ami. But yes, there will always be another mystery. The world is full of them, waiting for the little grey cells to unravel. For now, though, I am content to rest. The mind, like the body, requires repose. Hastings grinned. Rest you? I'll believe it when I see it. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perhaps you are right. But for today, let us enjoy the view, the air, the simplicity of this moment. Tomorrow, we shall see. And so they sat, the detective and his friend, watching the tide roll in, the case of Endhouse a memory, its lessons etched into their minds. For Hercule Poirot, it was not the end, but a pause, a moment of calm before the next challenge called. And call it would, for the world was never short of secrets, and Poirot was never short of the will to uncover them. The story of Endhouse, though, was finished. Its players had scattered, some to new beginnings, others to face their consequences. Nick Buckley, with her charm and her lies, would fade into the annals of Poirot's cases, a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked. And Endhouse itself, that crumbling mansion on the cliffs, would stand as a silent witness to the drama that had unfolded within its walls. As the sun set on their final evening in St. Lou, Poirot raised his glass of tisane in a quiet toast. To order, Hastings. To truth, and to the little grey cells which never fail. Hastings raised his own glass, a smile playing on his lips. To you, Poirot, and to whatever comes next. The glasses clinked, the sound carried away by the breeze, and the Cornish coast stretched out before them, endless and serene, a canvas for the mysteries yet to come. Chapter 11. The echoes of End House. The Cornish dawn broke over the cliffs with a quiet majesty, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that reflected off the restless sea. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace of the majestic hotel, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the wild beauty of the landscape. His hands were clasped behind his back, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the morning dew. The case of End House had reached its climax with Nick Buckley's dramatic confession and arrest. But for Poirot, the final act was not yet complete. There were loose ends to tie, truths to solidify, and a lingering question that gnawed at his little grey cells. Why had Nick chosen such a perilous path? And what secrets remained buried in the shadows of End House? Beside him, Captain Hastings yawned, his straw hat tilted slightly askew. "Well, Poirot," he said, rubbing his eyes, "it's over, isn't it? Nick's in custody, the truth is out. I suppose we'll be heading back to London soon." Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his restless mind. "Over, mon ami. Perhaps the stage is cleared, but the echoes of this drama linger. There are questions yet unanswered, details that must be clarified. We shall not leave St. Louis until the curtain falls completely." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "What more is there?" Nick admitted to orchestrating the accidents, to killing Maggie for Michael Seaton's fortune. The police have her. The evidence is solid. What's left to uncover? Poirot's green eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who saw beyond the obvious. "The motive, Hastings, is never so simple as greed alone. Mademoiselle Nick was desperate. But desperation is a spark, not the fire itself. What drove her to such lengths? And what of the others, those who surrounded her, who played their parts in this tragedy? We must return to End House one final time. The truth, it waits for us there." The morning air was crisp as they made their way along the coastal path, the cliffs rising sharply to their left, the sea crashing below. End House loomed ahead, its weathered facade a silent witness to the events that had unfolded within its walls. The mansion, with its cracked windows and ivy-clad walls, seemed quieter now, as if relieved of the burden of its secrets. Yet Poirot's steps were purposeful, his cane tapping rhythmically against the gravel, a metronome to his thoughts. They were met at the door by Jim Lazarus, his usually vibrant demeanor subdued. His dark hair was disheveled, his eyes shadowed with grief. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said, his voice low. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon. The house feels empty without Nick." "Empty, Monsieur Lazarus." Poirot's tone was gentle but probing. "Or perhaps it is free of a weight it could no longer bear. May we enter? There are matters we must discuss." Jim nodded, stepping aside to let them into the drawing room. The space was unchanged. Wallpaper, mismatched furniture, the faint smell of damp wood, but the absence of Nick's vivacious presence left it hollow. Frederica Rice sat by the window, her blonde hair catching the morning light, her face pale and drawn. Charles Vyse stood near the fireplace, his lawyer's composure intact but his eyes wary. The Crofts surprisingly were absent, having announced their intention to return to Australia the previous evening. "Merci for receiving us," Poirot said, taking a seat with his usual precision. "I come not to disturb but to clarify. The case of End House is closed, yet there are shadows that remain. I wish to understand the heart of Mademoiselle Nick's actions, and for that, I need your candor." Frederica's lips tightened, but she nodded. "What do you want to know, Monsieur Poirot?" "Nick's gone. She betrayed us all, especially Maggie. What more is there to say?" Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Much, Madame Rice. Let us begin with you. You were her closest friend, Nan. You knew her joys, her fears, perhaps her secrets. Tell me, did you ever suspect her involvement with George, the dealer?" Frederica hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. I knew she was reckless. She'd disappear sometimes, come back flushed, laughing too loudly. I thought it was just her way, living on the edge. But cocaine? No, I didn't know. Not until you found that watch." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Madame, you were not surprised when I mentioned George. Your reaction, it was too calm, too controlled. You knew of him, perhaps through whispers, through moments you chose not to question." Frederica's gaze dropped to the floor. "Maybe I heard his name once or twice. Nick mentioned him, said he was a friend who helped with her debts. I didn't ask more. I didn't want to know." Jim Lazarus interjected, his voice sharp with anger. "Why didn't you tell someone, Freddie? If you'd said something, maybe Maggie would still be alive." Frederica flinched, her eyes filling with tears. "Don't you think I've asked myself that? I loved Nick. I trusted her. I never imagined she'd go this far." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the rising tension. "Enough, Monsieur Lazarus. The past cannot be undone, but it can be understood. Let us turn to you. Your devotion to Mademoiselle Nick was evident, yet it blinded you. Did you never notice her manipulations, her careful orchestration of events? Jim's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. I loved her, Poirot. I saw what she wanted me to see: her laughter, her charm. I thought she was in danger, not causing it. When Maggie died, his voice broke and he looked away. I should have seen it, but I didn't. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. Love, it is a powerful veil. And you, Monsieur Vyse. He turned to the lawyer, whose stiff posture belied his unease. You managed Mademoiselle Nick's affairs. You knew of her debts, her desperation. Did you know of her plan? Charles Vyse adjusted his glasses, his voice measured. I knew she was in financial trouble. Yes, End House is a money pit, and her inheritance was dwindling. I advised her to sell, but she refused. As for her plan, no, I had no idea. I'm a lawyer, not a mind reader. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his skepticism. Yet you drafted her will, a will that named Maggie Buckley as her heir, in the absence of Michael Seton. Curious, is it not, that you never mentioned this detail? Vyse's face paled. It wasn't relevant. Nick was young, healthy. I didn't think. You did not think, Poirot interrupted, his voice sharp. Or you chose not to think. Your loyalty to Mademoiselle Nick, it was not merely professional, was it? You cared for her, perhaps more than you admit. Vyse's lips pressed into a thin line. My feelings are irrelevant. I did my duty. If you're accusing me of complicity, you're mistaken. Poirot's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. I accuse no one, Monsieur Vyse. I seek only the truth, and the truth is this. Mademoiselle Nick played you all, weaving a tapestry of deception that ensnared everyone in this room. But there is one piece of the puzzle that eludes me still: her connection to Michael Seton. The room fell silent, the mention of the missing aviator casting a shadow over the gathering. Hastings, unable to contain himself, leaned forward. Poirot, you said Seton's fortune was the motive, but he's missing, presumed dead. How could Nick be so sure she'd inherit? Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of revelation. An excellent question, mon ami, and one that brings us to the heart of the matter. Michael Seton, you see, is not missing. He is dead. I received confirmation this morning from my contacts in London. His plane was found wrecked off the coast of Australia, his body identified. The news was withheld, pending notification of his family, but Mademoiselle Nick, I suspect, knew long before. Frederica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dead. But how could Nick know? Poirot turned to her, his voice low and deliberate. Through George, Madame Dealer was more than a supplier of cocaine. He was a conduit for information, a man with connections in many dark corners. I believe Nick paid him to track Seton's movements, to confirm his death before the authorities did. She needed certainty that Maggie, as Seton's heir, stood between her and the fortune. Jim Lazarus shook his head, his voice hoarse. So she killed Maggie. For money she wasn't even guaranteed to get. Precisement, Poirot said. But there is more. The painting I mentioned, the one hidden among Nick's possessions, it was not merely a valuable artwork. It was a gift from Michael Seton, a token of his affection, and a clue to his intentions. In a letter tucked inside its frame, which I discovered only yesterday, Seton wrote of his plans to name Maggie his heir, bypassing Nick entirely. He suspected her recklessness, her greed, and wished to protect his fortune from her grasp. Hastings' eyes widened. Good Lord, Poirot. So Nick found out and decided to act before the will could be finalized. Hastings. She acted with ruthless precision, staging the accidents to create a narrative of danger, to deflect suspicion. Maggie's death was the final act, but it was also her undoing. The shawl, the cocaine, the chocolate sol were threads in a web too intricate to hold, and when I confronted her, she saw the game was lost. Her final act, the vial of cocaine, was her escape from justice, but not from truth. The room was heavy with the weight of Poirot's words. Frederica's tears fell silently. Jim stared at the floor, and Vyse's face was a mask of controlled emotion. Hastings, ever the empathetic soul, felt a pang of sorrow for the group, caught in Nick's web of deceit. Poirot rose, his movements graceful despite the somber mood. Mes amis, the echoes of End House will linger, but they must not define you. Mademoiselle Nick's actions were her own, driven by a heart that chose greed over love. You, who remain, must choose differently. He turned to Jim and Frederica, his voice softening. Monsieur Lazarus, Madame Rice, you have found solace in each other. Let that be your strength. The painting, now yours to claim, will secure your future. Use it wisely, and let End House be a home of light, not shadow. To Vyse he added, Monsieur, your duty to the Buckley family is done. Seek a path unburdened by the past. Your heart, I think, will guide you better than your ledgers. Vyse nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I'll consider my options. As they prepared to leave, Poirot paused at the door, his gaze sweeping the room one final time. End House, he said, almost to himself. It is a place of beauty and tragedy, but beauty it endures. Let it be so. The walk back to the majestic hotel was quiet, the cliffs bathed in the soft light of dawn. Hastings, his mind still reeling, broke the silence. Poirot, do you think they'll be all right? Jim and Frederica, I mean. After all this, Poirot's smile was faint but genuine. They are young, mon ami, and the heart is resilient. They will heal, in time, and End House will stand as a testament to their strength. As for us, we return to London, where new mysteries await. Hastings chuckled, the tension easing from his shoulders. You never stop, do you? Always another case, another puzzle. Notre Dame, Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. The world is full of disorder, Hastings, and it is the task of Hercule Poirot to restore order. The little grey cells, they never rest. They reached the hotel as the sun climbed higher, its rays warming the terrace where they had sat so often during the case. Poirot paused, taking in the view the sea, the cliffs, the distant silhouette of End House. A beautiful place, Nan, he said softly. But beauty, it must be protected from those who would tarnish it. Hastings nodded, his thoughts drifting to Maggie, to Nick, to the lives forever altered by the events at End House. You did it, Poirot. You found the truth, as always. Poirot's mustache twitched, a final flourish of satisfaction. We, mon ami, and now, we move forward. The curtain has fallen, but the stage is never empty. The days that followed were a flurry of farewells and preparations. Jim Lazarus and Frederica Rice announced their engagement. A quiet ceremony planned far from the shadows of End House. The painting, authenticated as a lost work by a renowned artist, fetched a sum that promised to secure their future. Charles Vyse, true to his word, resigned his position as the Buckley family lawyer, choosing instead to pursue a quieter life in London. The Crofts, their role in the affair minor but undeniable, sailed for Australia, their boisterous cheer replaced by a subdued departure. Poirot and Hastings, their suitcases packed, stood on the platform of St. Louis' small railway station, the train to London puffing steam in the distance. The Cornish Riviera stretched out behind them, its cliffs and sea of memory etched into their minds. Hastings, ever sentimental, glanced back. It's strange, Poirot. I'll miss this place, despite everything. Poirot adjusted his hat, his expression serene. Miss it, perhaps, but do not mourn it. End House has its story, and we have. They've played our part. Now, mon ami, let us return to the world, where new stories await. The train whistle blew, and they boarded, settling into their compartment as the Cornish coast faded from view. Poirot opened a small notebook, his pencil poised to jot down thoughts, already turning to the next challenge. Hastings watched him, a smile tugging at his lips. The case of End House was over, its echoes fading, but with Hercule Poirot, the pursuit of truth was never truly done. As the train rattled toward London, the sea gave way to rolling hills, and Poirot's voice broke the silence. Hastings, have you considered the curious case of the missing diplomat in Paris? I received a letter this morning. Hastings laughed, shaking his head. You're incorrigible, Poirot. Lead on, then. What's the story? And so, with the cliffs of Cornwall behind them and the promise of new mysteries ahead, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings rode into the future. The little grey cells, ever ready for the next adventure.